David Icke was born in Leicester, England on April 29, 1952, and he was clearly very pleased to be here. His was a working-class background in post-war England. He felt from an early age that he was here to do something, although he didn't know what. He thought at first that it was to be a footballer, a love throughout his childhood that led him to play as a professional throughout his teenage years until arthritis ended his career. He went on to be a journalist and BBC presenter, becoming a well-known face on British television for many years. He was also a national spokesman for the British Green Party in the 1980s, before the day his life was to change forever. For a year throughout 1989, he felt a presence around him. When he was alone, he felt that something else was always there, and it became ever more tangible. This led him to a professional psychic, Betty Shine, to see if she would pick up what was happening to him. He told her nothing about his experience, but she said that a presence was communicating to him through her. She said David was going out on a world stage to reveal great secrets. One man cannot change the world, she said, but one man can communicate the message that will change the world. She said he would face enormous opposition, but they would always be there to protect him. From that day, David's life became an amazing journey of synchronicity, leading him to people, documents, information, and personal experiences that gave him the puzzle pieces to reveal what is really happening in the world behind the smokescreen of lies, suppression, and manipulation. The journey took him to Peru, where incredible experiences followed, including a download of information on a hill close to a sacred Inca site, recreated here on a return visit in 2012, which involved him standing unable to move in a powerful electromagnetic field of energy for nearly an hour. His life then changed dramatically yet again. For 3 months after that experience, David said he was lost in a bewildered daze. Such was the impact of the massive energetic information download that he was struggling to process. He said it was like a computer freezing with too many keys pressed too quickly. In that same period, he appeared on a primetime BBC television chat show to talk about what had happened, and it led to mass public and media ridicule on a scale ongoing, year after year, that few will ever have experienced. It was historic in its intensity.
In the audience tonight,
But no, it's
but just let me say this.
They're laughing at you. They're not laughing with you.
Fine.
In the face of that enormous backlash, David thought his life was over, but it had only just begun. 3 months after the Peru experience, he says everything morphed back into clarity, and while he appeared to friends to be the old David again, he wasn't. Suddenly he could see the world in a way that he had not before. In his words, he could see beyond the program that holds humanity in often unknowing servitude. He has crisscrossed the world over and over and written a stream of books that have proved to be extraordinarily accurate in predicting world events and the direction of human society. The man that they said was mad is now at the cutting edge of exposing the human plight, lifting the veil on all that has been kept from us. As David once said, today's mighty oak is just yesterday's nut that held its ground. Prepare for a day you will never forget. Ladies and gentlemen, David Icke.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Very kind. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, that's okay. You'll make me cry. Thank you. I'd like to welcome you to the last of the Worldwide Wake Up Tour all-day events, which started in the summer of 2016, and I've been all around the world, right across Australia, America, Europe, Scandinavia, the Balkans. And I would like to pay tribute at this last event, because it's become very relevant, to the management of this venue. Because the more successful I have been in communicating suppressed information, the more the efforts have intensified to silence me. And so, in more and more recent times, efforts by what I call ultra-Zionist hate groups who seek to get the public to hate their targets and thus silence them, I've been trying to get my events cancelled. Last week they managed it. We found another one though, at, of all places, Manchester United's ground, when Manchester United, that's supposed to be a giant football club, showed itself to have no integrity, no class, and no backbone, pulling an event on the day without even telling us. We found out in the media. Contrast that with the efforts to stop this event today going ahead, and the management of this venue, the Mech, saying, we're not having it. It's going ahead. That is the backbone and the integrity we need to meet this now war on freedom of speech that's coming from every angle. And two things. One, the management who did that are going to see today that what I'm accused of is a racist by these ultra-Zionist hate groups is absolutely the opposite of what I'm presenting. And what they say I'm going to say today actually is going to be the opposite of what they say. That's how incredible, ridiculous, and outrageous this mendacity is. But if you cannot silence someone on the basis of what they're saying, then lie about what they're saying and silence them that way. And the other thing that people are going to see today is the real reason, as this day unfolds, the real reason why there is this gathering hysteria to silence me. And that is the information they are really trying to suppress and silence. And it's got nothing to do with race or racism, and everything to do with controlling the narrative so that only one version of world events ever gets heard, and thus no one questions it. But I should be, and I am, greatly encouraged by this hysteria, this efforts to silence me, not least because of this famous quote by Mahatma Gandhi. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Well, they have ignored me. My goodness, they have laughed at me. And now they think they have to fight me. And I won't be fighting them. I don't want to fight anybody. I'm just going to do what I do. They can fight me if they want. But fighting me is just one step from then you win. And it's not me winning. It's freedom winning. It's freedom of expression winning. It's free debate and free discourse winning. And we will. And we frickin' will. Now, the irony is that apparently for much of the last nearly 30 years that I've been on this journey, I was mad. I wasn't dangerous. I am now, apparently. But I was mad. He's mad, he is. And the reason they said that I was mad is because I am different. And different is not another word for madness. But we are constantly led to believe that it is, so that anything outside the box is immediately waved away and ridiculed. You know, someone just called me normal. You can call me anything you like, and most people have called me everything you can imagine. But don't call me normal. If you want to insult me, call me. Don't call me normal. Because when you look at normality in this crazy world, if this crazy world sees you as normal, it's time to look again at what we're doing. What we call normal is only what we normally experience, nothing more. That's all it is. If you live in the outback of Australia, your normal is never seeing anybody and never seeing a car, a vehicle pass by. If you're born in downtown Manhattan, your normal is never not seeing people and never not seeing vehicles pass by. It's just what we normally experience. And so it's not me that's mad. It's me that's different. It's not me that's mad. It's the world that's mad. The world of insanity that has persuaded itself that insanity is normal. We live in a crazy place, a madhouse. And if you're born into a crazy place and you grow up in a crazy place and you go through your entire life in the crazy place, crazy is your normal because it's all you've ever known. And someone comes out from outside of the crazy place and says, hey, this is madness. It's a crazy place. What do they say? You're mad. You're not normal. It's exactly what happens in this madhouse to anyone that challenges convention. Here's a great quote. Birds born in a cage think flying is an illness. Exactly. Another thing about a crazy place, an idiot is a genius to another idiot. So this crazy place fates idiots, puts them into power, builds statues to them, then knocks them down these days. So what we're going to do today is take a journey through the madhouse. And I'm going to use this symbol of the rabbit hole. And with each section, I'm going to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. And my goodness, when we get further into the day, we're going to go into some strange places. But I'm going to start outside the rabbit hole. What people call the real world, the world that people perceive every day. And in the real world, there is such a thing, for a start, as time, and time only goes forward. And as you go forward in this time in the real world, you go through different ages and generations, and eventually you come to where you think you are. And on that process of time at first existing and then only going forward, it means that wherever you are in this sequence, you believe to be yourself to be on the cutting edge of evolution. Evolution can't go backwards, can, but not in the real world. It can't. And in this forward passage of time, we evolve. So we go from a position where particular bloodlines, interbreeding bloodlines, automatically go into the positions of power as kings and queens and monarchs as a result of their bloodline. And then, apparently, we moved on, and we moved on to dark suit politicians. And they're, because we moved on now, they're there only for the benefit of the people. They only have the best interests of the people at heart in this real world. Democracy and freedom in the real world are interchangeable. They both mean the same thing. They don't, but that's what we're led to believe. In the real world, governments are good. One thing to remember, governments are good. And those that governments bomb and do this, they're evil. They're always evil. Anyone governments bomb. Got to remember that one. Terrorism in the real world is bad. Bad. But governments fighting terrorism and doing this to civilian areas is good. Fighting terrorism, all good. Everything is black and white. Everything is them and us. Everything is bad guys and good guys. No shades of grey, no peripheral vision, nothing. Black and white. In the real world, they must know they're the government. They must know they're scientists. They must know they're doctors. They must know they're teachers. They must know they're professors. They must know they're journalists. I'll just throw that one in as a bit of light relief early on, wake everybody up this time of the morning. And all you have to do in the real world to find out what's happening is watch the evening news. Good evening. Bullshit. Good night. Night after night, day after day after day. In the real world, life is random. Nothing's connected. Everything's apart from everything else. It's all happening by accident. And the real world, is solid. Ooh, it's solid. Therefore, it's limited. Reality in the real world is a mystery. Ooh, where are we? And who we are, the very essence of who we are, apparently, is a mystery. Ooh. Now that and so many other elements are the pillars of this real world perceptual prison. And every single one of them, everyone, is an illusion. We should not confuse truth with what we believe. Big mistake that so many make. We are at the cutting edge of evolution. Cutting edge, cutting edge, cutting edge. Now we are we? Cutting edge, cutting edge, cutting fricking edge. Oh, look, man. What time's the game show on? Oh, gee, the world is mad. And once you realize that, it all makes sense. It's not you that's mad. It's the world you live in. And people make this mistake. Oh, it must be me. No, it's not you. The freaking world's mad. Once you realize that, that's why they do that. It's crazy. Yes, exactly. Then comes the question, why is it crazy? Because it's not crazy by accident. There's method in the madness. Why is the world an inversion? Why is it upside down? Because it is. This is a great quote from a guy called Michael Elner. Just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy justice. Universities destroy knowledge. Governments destroy freedom. The major media destroy information. And religions destroy spirituality. The upside down world that we live in. And Alice in Wonderland. Nothing would be what it is, because everything would be what it isn't. And contrary-wise, what it is, it wouldn't be. And what it wouldn't be, it would. You see? And I've just described the world. And all this is happening by chance. You must be joking. And I have this phrase, my dot is the only dot. And this is what holds so many people in servitude to their dot. Their dot might be their career, it might be their family, it might be a football team, it might be anything that they choose to focus upon. And nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with any of that. But if you focus on a dot so closely, you lose peripheral vision. Put anything in front of your eyes like that. You've got no peripheral vision, you can only just see that. And it's in the peripheral vision that all this manipulation that I'm talking about goes on. And if you're focused on a dot, you're not going to see it. If you see the pieces, the dots, only, and not how they fit together, no one will ever be able to see what's going on in the world. And that's why the world is presented to us as unconnected dots and random events. People are so obsessed with the twigs that they can't see the forest. And it's at the forest level that it all fits together, where you see the tapestry and not just the strands. And it's, whoa, so that's what's going on. Life is not unconnected. On every single level of experience and reality, everything is connected and is ultimately one consciousness. But to see this picture, we have to answer these questions. Where are we being taken day by day? How are we being taken there? Who is taking us there and why? And I'll answer those questions before the day is out. And we'll start with this one. Where are we being taken? Like I say, day by day by day, and ever more obviously, we're being taken here to what I call the Hunger Games Society. At the top, you have an elite 1%, actually less than 1% at its core, that are designed, and they're moving there so fast, they are planned to control everything. All wealth, all decision-making, in the end, even all thought. At the bottom of the Hunger Games Society pyramid is virtually everyone else. Yes, including those that think none of this matters to them because they've got a bit of money in the bank and a nice house and go on holiday twice a year. Those people too are planned to be here. And holding this status quo ongoing is planned to be a merciless, not just police state in the end, but a military police state in which the police and the military are the same. And just look around the world, just look at what's happening in terms of imposition by the state through people in uniform. And you can see it's happening in front of our eyes all the time. 1% currently own 50% of the world's wealth. The Hunger Games Society is not coming, it's here. It's just a case of how extreme we allow it to be. Or we roll it back. What a great idea. Gates, Microsoft, Buffett, the investor, Bezos of Amazon, those three people are worth together more than 160 million Americans. That's the extent of the Hunger Games Society, which I've been talking about all these years, that we've now reached. Crushing austerity for some, more and more wealth for the tiny few. This is the process of creating the Hunger Games Society. And this is the structure, the control structure of that society, which again is unfolding before our eyes. They want a world government that would dictate to every community. A world central bank that would dictate all finance globally. A world currency, which is I've been writing since the early 1990s, is designed to be a cashless digital currency. With no cash, we are hurtling towards the cashless society because it's part of this agenda. A world army to impose the will of the world government, which is designed to be NATO and other elements I'll come to later. And a Microsoft, yes, it is actually, in so many ways. It's certainly a microchipped population. But microchip population does not even begin to cut what I'm talking about. And in section 3, I'll get into that. What does transhumanism really mean? It means the end of the human mind if we sit around and watch it happen. And under that, designed to be a series of superstates, the European Union being the furthest advanced, to carry out the will of the world government in various regions of the world. Under that, nation states, which they want to break up into regions, to deunify in a unified challenge to that edifice of power above. And these organizations like the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, are designed to be controlled by the world government and put these subject area policies under one roof where they can be decided globally. And I've been writing now since well back into the 1990s about the plan for the world government, and now they're even talking about it openly. And we have a de facto world government already called the United Nations Security Council. The European Union is part of it, and of course NATO, the World Army. And this is the moving step by step to this Hunger Games society, which is been described in my earlier books way back. So how are we being taken there? Question number 2. And this is where we take our first step into the rabbit hole, into the shadows, into the arena of secret societies and semi-secret groups, from where the world of the seen is manipulated without people realizing it. The world is structured as a spider's web, symbolically. You've got the spider at the center of the web, which is dictating everything. The nature of that spider, what it is, I'll get to in section 3. These strands around the spider represent the most exclusive and therefore secretive secret societies. Only the really, really chosen few will have any chance of being part of those and thus be close to understanding the full nature of what the agenda is. As you come out from the spider, still in the hidden, you meet those secret societies we do know about. The Freemasons, the Knights of Malta, Knights Templar, Opus Dei, etc. And they are secret societies which the inner circle knows what's going on, or some of it, and the rest only know increasingly less about what's going on as they come down the pyramid of compartmentalization. And then eventually, you meet what I call the cusp organizations. This is where the hidden meets the seen. And here's another portrayal of it. These cusp organizations are like the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations in America, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, also the United Nations is part of this. And the plan comes from the spider through these cusp organizations, which are amalgamations of people in all these different institutions and walks of life. And through these, that which is decided by the spider enters the world of the seen. And at this point, it appears that governments, government agencies, corporations, banking systems, etc., are making the decisions. No, no, no. They are carrying out the decisions that ultimately start with the spider. And this is why the world is so unbelievably coordinated. And when you travel the world constantly, as I do, my goodness me, it is so obvious now. The same things are happening everywhere. This is how it's done. And like I say, secret societies are broken up into levels of degree. What are they? They're levels of knowledge of what actually the secret society is all about. The vast majority of Freemasons are on the bottom 3 levels of degree and never get to know what they're really part of. This is the compartmentalization I'm talking about. So, world-changing events are random. No, they're not. They're carefully planned, and I mean long before. We are looking at an unfolding plan that is projected far into what we perceive to be the future, while apparently happening randomly, bit by bit. It's not how it works. Prophecy. Prophecy about what is coming is not prophecy. It's just knowing what the agenda is. The reason, or a major reason, why so many more people around the world are now looking at my information is because what I wrote in books in the 1990s is now happening now all the time. Why? Because I sat in a darkened room and pulled it out the ether? No. Once you break in to this projected agenda through hard work, research, and effort, you can access this projected plan for the world. Unless someone comes in, that is what the whole point of what I do and others do, is to create this intervention. Unless there's an intervention to stop that plan unfolding, that plan will unfold. Therefore, if you can access what the plan is, you can predict the future. The idea is not to be predicting the future accurately, but for what they plan not to happen. And that's exactly what these two people were doing. George Orwell in his book 1984, published in 1948, and Aldous Huxley in his book Brave New World, published in 1932, they weren't coming purely from their imagination. They'd accessed this projected agenda, and therefore they could accurately, unless there was an intervention, predict what was happening. This is why these two books are proved so extraordinarily prophetic in terms of current events. It wasn't just a story, it was knowledge of the future, a future that is now. And I'm not going to read all this stuff, you'll be delighted to know, but this guy's very, very interesting. In 1969, going on this theme of being able to predict the future if you know the agenda, this guy, Dr. Richard Day, he was a Rockefeller family insider. He was an executive of Planned Parenthood, which was a Rockefeller organization that actually started out as a eugenics organization originally. I say originally. He, for some reason no one knows, he addressed a meeting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in 1969 of pediatricians. And he asked them to turn off recording equipment and not to take notes because he was going to tell them how the world was going to change, because what he represented was going to change it. What he said that day, compared with current events, is so phenomenally accurate, not just in theme either, in fine detail often. The World Wide Web, we're told, was invented in 1989. Richard Day described it in 1969. Smart TVs that can film and record you in your own front room, and we're only seeing Mark 1 and 2 of them now, not where it's meant to go, were supposed to have come out around 2008. Dr. Richard Day described them in 1969. George Orwell described them in 1948. He called them telescreens. This is something that is not random. It's not a real world. It's a world of illusion. And the reason we don't know about it, until now, is this, what I call the program. The idea is to hoard knowledge, advanced knowledge, nature of reality knowledge, technological knowledge, knowledge of the agenda at the top of this global pyramid, just another way of symbolizing the spider's web, and to keep the target population in ignorance of that knowledge so they don't know what the hell's going on. Control perception and you control reality. And to control perception, you need to control information received from which we form perception. And this is the stadium on which everything is played out. Everything. When there's a few of you and you want to control the great many, you can't do it physically. They're planning to do that through transhumanist technology, as I'll come to, but they have not been able to do it so far. You have to get the population you're targeting to have perceptions that suit your agenda, so they will then, from those perceptions, behave in ways that suit your agenda. And this is basically a description of various scientific studies about the herd mentality. A tendency, this is about humanity, a tendency by the vast majority to follow on mindlessly without resistance. That is the program that I'm talking about. The idea is to get the population to see the world through the system's eyes, and thus be no problem for the system. This guy's called Edward Bernays. He's known as the father of PR, another word for lying. And he wrote this book in 1928. This is not new. And he said this, a book called Propaganda. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, the public perception. He said the secret was engineering the consent of the people in order to control and regiment them according to our will without their knowing about it. He described this as the true ruling power in our society, and he called it the invisible government. Exactly what it is. And there are many social engineering organizations around the world who are there to manipulate the public perception in that way described. And this is one of the most famous of them, perhaps the most famous, the Frankfurt School of Social Engineering, formed in the Rothschild city of Frankfurt in the 1920s. And this was their wish list they started out with. Started out in Frankfurt, then it moved to other places, ended up in California, where all political correctness came out of, as I'll get to. This is where it came from. And this was their wish list all that time ago. The creation of racism offenses, continual change to create confusion, the teaching of sex to young children, huge immigration to destroy national identity, the promotion of excessive drinking, emptying churches, in other words, undermining any form of social cohesion, legal system with bias against victims of crime, dependency on the state or state benefits and then pulling them once dependency is achieved. This is what the Hunger Games Society is about. Control and dumbing down of the media, brackets achieved. Encouraging the breakdown of the family. Now that last one is on virtually every wish list of social engineering organizations I've seen. The destruction of the family unit, and there are reasons for that, which I'll explain as the day unfolds. So this is the life program, the perception download that people are put through from cradle to grave to download perceptions the system finds acceptable to its agenda. First of all, you come out of the womb, hello world, and the first stage of programming is the parents. And the parents have been through the process that you're about to go through, have bought the program, not everybody, but most people, and out not thinking they're doing the best for the child, they pass the program on immediately to the child in terms of perceptions of reality. In a ludicrously short time, what is it now, 4 years? You've just arrived in the world, blinking. And suddenly, in 4 years, you're sitting at a desk in front of an authority figure, being told what's right, what's wrong, what is, what isn't, what's possible, what's impossible, who you are, who you're not, when you can go to the toilet, when you can eat, when you can talk, when you have to be there, when you can go home. You've only just frickin' arrived. It's madness. Control perception and you control reality. Education is not about educating. It's about programming. Programming a perception for life that suits the system. That's why they do it. It's child abuse. And what does school teach children? Truth comes from authority. Intelligence is the ability to remember and repeat. Accurate memory and repetition are rewarded. Non-compliance is punished. Hello, is that Mrs. Jones? Yeah, well, it's Johnny. He's a problem. Why? Because he's asking questions in the classroom. They'll all want to do it if we let him. We're thinking of giving him some Ritalin. Calm him down. Conform intellectually and socially. Lesson for life. The system knows best and is always right. I will follow the rules. I will follow the rules. I will follow the rules. You've got to get young children into the mindset of following the rules, carrot and the stick, follow the rules. So they will go on following the rules for the rest of their lives and not challenge or even question. And it's all based on fear. Fear of what? Fear of not following the rules. Exam panic, don't worry, kids, it's all a hoax. We have children committing suicide because they either fear they won't do well in exams or they haven't done well. We have young children's formative years destroyed by fear of not being educationally successful. We destroy childhoods. We destroy uniqueness. I tell you, kids, anybody listening to this and the DVD that's being recorded today, don't let your life be defined by examination passes or school. You define your life. Don't let them do it. I left school at 15. Never took an exam in my life. Major exam. Best thing that ever happened. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And what do they teach you? What do they teach you? All this crap that where do you ever use it? Algebra. Algebra. What are you putting algebra into children's minds for? Tompkins, what does X equal? I don't give a shit. Whatever you want it to equal. Whatever makes you happy, just leave me alone. I'm daydreaming. That was me all through my school years. Ike, stop daydreaming. Okay. Back to it. This is a great quote. Sometimes the most brilliant and intelligent minds do not shine in standardized tests because they do not have standardized minds. And so many people said to me over the years, I weren't very good at school, I'm not very intelligent. What's that got to do with school? What's intelligence got to do with school? Some of the most idiotic, ridiculously idiotic journalists I've ever met, who didn't know their arse from their elbow when it came to journalism. They had big strings of exam passes and degrees. Intelligence can't be taught. It comes from within. Great line from Einstein. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. This is exactly what happens. They're not interested in bringing out the unique gifts that everyone has, only that which will serve the system. Schools, programming prisons for our children. That's what they are if it's broken down. I'm not saying kids should have education and be given access to knowledge, but that's not what this is all about. It's programming perception. I'm not in prison. All right. So you can leave school whenever you like, can you? Well, I can when the bell goes, yeah. And you can go whenever you like. Well, as long as it's before the bell. Yes, you're in prison. And look at it. Look at the body language. When kids come out of school and they've got a little holiday, a week, 2 weeks, what do? They come out of school. Yes, freedom. Yes, no school for a week. What does a prisoner do when he comes out after a long sentence? Comes out of the prison. Yes, freedom. The only thing is that kids are allowed to go home in the evening. But then what happens? Homework. They can't even leave them alone then. It's all a program. And school teaches you to know your place in society. So you have private schools for the rich. and they overwhelmingly produce the governors of society. And then you have the state schools, like I went to, and they produce the workers and the slaves, the governed. There is some crossover, but shockingly little. And, you know, we have this phrase, politicians use it in Britain all the time. We have to prepare children for the workplace. Oh, so you don't prepare children to bring out the unique gifts and spontaneity and inspiration that is within them. Oh, no. You've got to prepare them for the workplace. Yes, make them cogs in a machine. And that's all. And that's why the education system takes children like that and turns so many into that. It's a program. J.D. Rockefeller, very nice man, J.D. Rockefeller, never went home. Very good to his mother. I don't want a nation of thinkers, he said. I want a nation of workers. Exactly. And it's systematic because the left side of the brain, this is mainstream science now, the left side of the brain is basically, it processes information that sees everything apart from everything else. It sees everything in hierarchical terms, and it's all the elements of what we would call the system, and it's all the elements of the education system. And the right side of the brain is the artist, it's the maverick, it's the inspired, it's the creative. And the system, not least the education system, is set up to put guards on the gate to the left side of the brain to stop right brain influence. So the whole of the education system, this is why spending on the arts and drama and artists and all the rest of it has been systematically removed and removed and removed, because the education system is about imprisoning young people for life in there. And that's brilliantly symbolized in this advert for a car advertisement. But it's a brilliant expression of the creative, maverick, spontaneity part of the brain and the left brain that they want people to be in for life. Great line summing up the difference between the right and the left brain. The moment a little boy is concerned with which is a jay and which is a sparrow, he can no longer see the birds or hear them sing. Exactly. So, left brain's this way, please, we're doing algebra. And this is a major, major study in America at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, involving school-age children between kindergarten through 12th grade. This is what they found happened to those children between those 2 points. A massive decline in creativity, right brain, as children have become less emotionally expressive, less energetic, less talkative and verbally expressive, less humorous, less imaginative, right brain, less unconventional, right brain, less lively and passionate, right brain, less perceptive, less apt to connect seemingly irrelevant things, right brain. It's the right brain that connects the dots. The left brain sees only dots. Less synthesizing, ditto, and less likely to see things from a different angle. Exactly. That's the program download imposing itself on perception. So be a good citizen, accept the program. And then we'll give you good grades. We'll say you're clever. And then you will progress to higher education, where in more and more countries, not least in Britain and America, young people, the start of their lives, get up to their neck in debt to pay for their own programming to the banks. Student trap, get them to pay a fortune for their own programming, then control them through debt for the rest of their lives. That's what that is all about. And so, you finish this education and you go out into the world. You go out to be a company director, a politician, a doctor, a teacher, a scientist, a journalist, a CEO or something. And what you take with you is that core programming of normal, that core programming of how things are that you've been downloading virtually from the moment you came into this world. And unless we think for ourselves, that is going to be the driving perception for the rest of people's lives. And what happens then is all these institutions with this core programming then start confirming to everybody, each other, and the public in general, that the core programming is right. So if a journalist is going to do a story on, say, an illness, they won't go to a complementary practitioner who may have had great success with this illness, this disease. They'll go to a doctor who will give them the song sheet version of that disease, and usually how it can't be treated. And if a journalist is writing a story about the nature of reality, they won't come to someone like me who's been studying it for 30 years, virtually full time. No. They'll go to a scientist who'll give them the song sheet version of reality. Hey, everything's solid. Oh, yes, I see it now. That's what they want at the end of this program. Oh, I see it now. When you don't see a thing. All these areas of download create the bubble program, as I call it. But what goes with the bubble program is the arrogance bubble. Anyone questioning the bubble of downloaded reality is mad or dangerous, or in my case now, both. A number of philosophers have basically said the same thing over the years. This is Confucius. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. When you know you don't know it all, your mind is open to other possibilities outside of the prevailing possibility. When you think you know it all, that open channel shuts down. Then there's programming stage 3, peer pressure. And all these programs are running concurrently, not one after the other. And peer pressure. This is when those, the vast majority, who have been through the program and downloaded it and accepted it as normal, then give a hard time, ridicule or abuse to those around them that question the program. And it's one thing that happens, again with fear, is people stay silent about how they feel for fear of ridicule. So peer pressure. I was talking years ago about the fact that humanity has out-sheeped the sheep, because people laugh at sheep because they follow the one in front and run away from the sheepdog, symbolic of fear. Bah, bah, bah. But humans have out-sheeped the sheep because we've dispensed with the sheepdog. We don't need a sheepdog to keep us in line. We keep each other in line through peer pressure. It's one of the great ways that humanity is controlled by itself. And then you have programming stage 4, the mainstream media. Here we go. Good evening. Lies, half-truths, official line, complete bollocks. Good night. Now here's Bill with the weather. Hour after hour, channel after channel, on it goes. And I've worked in newsrooms as a journalist, and I tell you what, if you take what's going on in the world from that environment, you're never going to know. How to control what people think, create or buy out major news agencies and TV channels, only publish stories that promote your agenda, maintain debate within a strictly limited range of views and subjects, focus on traumatic events to keep the people traumatized and in fear, label anyone who exposes your system and manipulation as a conspiracy theorist. The terms conspiracy theorist and conspiracy theory came into widespread use from the 1960s, when in 1967, the CIA sent out, published shown a picture of the document in my new book just out, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, to major media organizations in America, urging them to use the term conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist to discredit those who were questioning the Kennedy assassination and other assassinations in the 1960s. And all these decades later, the mainstream media, who think they know it all and knows damn all, are using the same CIA term to try to discredit people like me. This is a journalist from Germany, Udo Uvkotti, who, after years and years of writing stories under his own name that were given to him by the CIA, not even German intelligence, he came out and and explained how journalism really works and who's really putting the information in the papers that people take to be fact. How can I lie to the media, or how can the media lie to you? It knows you simply won't check the facts, or at least most people won't. So we have the program download from these various elements, and that's where perceptions are formed. And the perception is a narrow, narrow band of possibility on purpose, so people will not see what's really going on. And I call that narrow band the postage stamp consensus. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny little area of perceived possibility on what is happening in the world to keep us in perceptual imprisonment for life. So, what I will call the system is this program of perceptual manipulation and control. And so, you've been through the education system, you're coming out now, and they're off. Oh, I must get there. I must succeed. I must be someone. I have to succeed. And how do we succeed? Where people say, oh, he's a success, look at him or her. We do it by succeeding on the system's terms. The system even gives us our symbols of success, which are basically money, property, fame, power as it's perceived. So if most people are, because of the way the system works, are in a state of insecurity. Instead of getting their power from within, say what you like about me, I don't care. Instead of that, they're getting their sense of security from other people. This is why social media is so devastating to so many people when the trolls start. And so if you're going to get that reaction, oh, you're successful, you're doing well, you have to succeed according to the symbols of success that everyone has accepted as success. And so they even control our sense of accomplishment. So what happens? This is the great thing. I mean, I have to be honest. This is the great thing about when you leave school. Everything does change. It does, in this way. When you're a kid, all right, and you're in bed in the morning, and your body says, I don't want you to get up yet. Oh, the bell's going to go. Oh. Your mum comes in and goes, come on, darling, you'll be late for prison. Now, she says school, but I'm kind of being accurate, you know what I mean? And then everything changes. Oh, my goodness me. What happens then when you leave school is your partner comes in and says, come on, darling, you have to be in prison in 20 minutes. It's the same program, just a continuation of it. Instead of what will the teacher say, it's what will the boss say. Same program, different label. And controlled by fear of not following the program and the consequences of it. And all the time, we are given these carrots, so we keep trying to get to the carrot, but it's rigged. It's all rigged. It's like going around on a carousel horse, thinking you're going to catch the one in front. It's not possible. The game is rigged. But we keep following it, and that carrot is success. Oh, success! You have no time to eat. You must be successful. You're far too busy. Oh, the life program. What are we doing? Oh, you come out for a beer? No, look at it. God, you're successful. Yeah, no. Bloody madness. What are we doing? In a society where stress is the growth industry, they piss on us and we say it's raining. It's so blatant. Here you go. Born, school, program. Ooh, work. Ooh, family. Ooh, gym. Next one. We call it frickin' life. Slavery. It works better when you don't tell them. But what about the successes? What about those who make it? Okay, what now? house, I've got a big bank account, I've got a big car, I'm successful. Oh, but are you? What I'm noticing around the world, more and more than I ever have in this world tour since 2016, is that earlier in life, earlier than before, people are starting to question, what? What is it all about? I've worked so hard at school, I work hard for this corporation or whatever, but I've got money and I've got a house and all that stuff, but I don't feel any satisfaction, I don't feel happy, I feel stressed. What's it all about? What's it all about? It's all a freaking hoax. It's a hoax to keep you on the conveyor belt until good night Ethel, good night Bill. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans, John Lennon said. Life is what happens to you while you're following the postage stamp normal at the exclusion of your infinite power and potential. And this is a short video by a guy called Alan Watt. He was a Western mystic, you might call him. Very, very intelligent man who could see through it. And this little video encompasses everything that I've said so far. Oh, hold on. There you go.
In music,
there you go.
one doesn't make the end of a composition the point of the composition. If that were so, the best conductors would be those who played fastest. And there would be composers who wrote only finales. People go to a concert just to hear one crashing chord, because that's the end. But we don't see that as something brought by our education into our everyday conduct. We've got a system of schooling which gives a completely different impression. It's all graded. And what we do is we put the child into the corridor of this grade system with a kind of, come on, kitty, kitty, kitty. And yeah, you go to kindergarten, you know. And that's a great thing because when you finish that, you'll get into first grade. And then, come on, first grade leads to second grade, and so on, and then you get out of grade school, you've got high school, and it's revving up, the thing is coming. Then you're going to go to college, and by Jove, then you get into graduate school, and when you're through with graduate school, you go out to join the world. And then you get into some racket where you're selling insurance. And they've got that quota to make. And you're going to make that. And all the time, this thing is coming. It's coming. It's coming. That great thing, the success you're working for. Then when you wake up one day about 40 years old, you say, my God, I've arrived. I'm there. And you don't feel very different from what you always felt. And there's a slight letdown because you feel there's a hoax. And there was a hoax. A dreadful hoax. They made you miss everything. We thought of life by analogy with a journey, with a pilgrimage, which had a serious purpose at the end, and the thing was to get to that end, success or whatever it is, or maybe heaven after you're dead. But we missed the point the whole way along. It was a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or to dance while the music was being played.
Brilliant. And it's the musical thing, the singing and dancing while the music is being played, that the program is there to stop. So if the system is not for us, then who is it for and why? The other thing about the program, it doesn't just define perception of the world, it defines self-identity, or tries to if we allow it. And people get their self-identity from the program. And there's a religion that has been passing through the entirety of known human history, and it's the religion of I am R. And it's come right through the present day, and it has a chant. It has a particular chant. It goes, I am Ma, I am Ma, I am Ma. I can join in if you like. And today, we see this religion and make that mantra when we say, I am man, woman, black, white, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, middle class, working class, name, age, and birth date. I am label. I have fallen into label consciousness. Label consciousness, the belief that who we are is our name, our life story, our race, our religion, our income bracket, when what they are is not who we are, but what we're experiencing. And I call that phantom self. And most people live lives created by the program as phantom selves, unaware of the true self. We are awareness, a state of being aware. We are not the experience. We are that awareness which is having the experience, which is a very different thing. I'm going to get into this big time in part 2, when I get into the illusory nature of reality. And what the program is trying to do, and so successfully, so often, is to focus attention. This is the point. Focus attention in the 5 senses only, so we perceive ourselves to be an I am at the exclusion of the infinity of consciousness that we are beyond that point of attention. And so we go through parental program, school program, university, peer pressure, celebrity, cul-de-sacs and diversions, media, job, survival, sport, career, conforming to norms, and we get the myopia of the program. Gotcha! This is why their biggest fear of the controlling network is people waking up beyond that. This is the great Bill Hicks, an American comedian who died tragically too early. A very awake man. Died around the age of 32, 33. And he said, except for pharmaceutical poison, there are essentially only 2 drugs that Western civilization tolerates. Caffeine from Monday to Friday to energize you enough to make you a productive member of society, and alcohol from Friday to Monday to keep you too stupid to figure out the prison that you've been living in. And so we look at the wider picture of this conspiracy within which the program is a fundamental foundation without which it couldn't work. People say about people like that, you see conspiracies everywhere. Well, first of all, conspiracies are everywhere because the dictionary definition is merely 2 or more people conspiring to create a particular end, usually illegal. But I am not talking today about multiple conspiracies. I don't talk about multiple conspiracies in my books. I'm looking at one conspiracy to enslave the human race through the human mind and human perception that has multiple different facets and faces, which is a very different thing. Now, the big thing about today, the books in general, but today, yes, certainly, is context. If people don't have context, and the media is about stopping that context, because most journalists don't have the context either, then you can look at individual people, you can look at individual events and happenings, and you can see them in and of themselves, dots. And they look a certain way. But you connect the dots, you put them in context with each other, and whoa! They look very, very different indeed, and they will as the day unfolds. I'll give you an example. People look at that. The vast majority of people, you say to them, what is that? And they say, I've no bloody idea. Well, it's got no context. Now there's the context. Now it's clear what that is. It's a butterfly wing, because the context is there. And what I'm going to do today is go through, in the first section, there's so many different levels of this in the rabbit hole, I'm going to lay out what the plan is in the world of the scene between now and the first break, and how it's unfolding. Now, everything that I'm going to talk about is happening in America. I feel sorry for Americans in so many ways, because America is a mind control laboratory. That's where things are tried out, that's where things are tested, and when they work in terms of the agenda and perceptual control, they are then exported all over the world. And people say, the American culture's everywhere. No, that which has worked is then exported. That's what we call the American culture. And as I've gone around the world, every time I go into a country, with this talk, in its various elements in this first section, I go through a checklist in that country of these various elements I'm going to go through to see if they're happening there. They're happening everywhere at the same time. Some are further ahead than others, sure, but the same things are happening everywhere. Why? The spider that is dictating globally. So here we go. How do we get there to the Hunger Games society? Number one, illusion of freedom and political choice. This is essential. Democracy is choice. No, it's not. We live in one-party states in terms of anyone that can form a government. And out of the spider, out of the unseen, come these characters that appear to randomly again appear in political circles in the world of the seen. The spider, the web, is spewing out these people, not to represent the interests of the people, but to represent the interests of the spider. And most of these people are so compartmentalized they don't even know it. Some do. And every single one of them, worldwide, virtually, with the odd exception, is standing on the postage stamp consensus in terms of their perception of reality. I'm not going to read all this, but this is an email from a guy called Michael Froman, former Citigroup executive. He wrote to Obama after Obama was coming up to winning the election the first time round. And he listed, he was sending it to aides of Obama, and he listed a series of people that he recommended for Obama's administration. Not just major positions, lower positions as well. Virtually all of them ended up in the Obama administration. That is how politics really works. So these are different names, different parties, but they have the same ultimate master, which is pushing on this same agenda, which is why nothing changes no matter what party moves to another one. And this is why. This is how it works in virtually every country. In the end, if you go deep enough, every country. But the American example is perfect. Under the Bush administration, before Obama, and even the mainstream media acknowledge this, the Republican Party and Bush were basically controlled by a group of people still around today with Trump called the neoconservatives or neocons. These were people like Henry Kissinger, Father Bush, and Cheney, major people in this neocon group. And there were a lot of American-Israeli dual citizens in the neocons. They controlled the Bush administration. Over in the Democratic administration, ongoing, is a similar group, which I call the Democons. This is people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, who died this year, George Soros, the Clintons for a long time, etc. And there's Kissinger as well. He goes between the two, advises presidents no matter what party they're in. And the key to understanding politics is that when you go one step back into the shadows from these controlling groups, they're both controlled by the same force. And so no matter who's in power, left, right, or center, that is in power. And because of that, nothing changes, and this agenda unfolds no matter who's in power. This is how it works. It's extraordinary when you break it down. Most countries have two parties, sometimes three, that have any chance of forming a government. So you vote for Party A and Party A get into government. You don't like what they're doing. So to get them out, you have to vote for Party B, and they get in, and you don't like what they're doing, because basically they're doing the same as what they're doing. So to get Party B out, you've got to go back to Party A. This is what happens. I was in Ukraine in 2011 speaking, and the president of the time, Yanukovych, who got thrown out, he had been kicked out in the Orange Revolution, as it was called. I think it was 2004. And they put another guy in a revolution. But they didn't like the other guy, and so to get the other guy out, they had to put the other party in, which that Yanukovych was still leading. So they voted back into power someone they threw out in a revolution because that was the choice they were given. And this is how it works. Presidential election, the biggest figure in the last American presidential election is that one at the top, 46.9% didn't vote because people are starting to suss it. They're starting to see the irrelevance of it. And what we call populism is a response, listen to us, of this political class, left, center, and right, that actually are owned by the same people. And Brexit in Britain was a response against this political class, which is absolutely most obvious in the dark soup bureaucracy in Brussels. But we have to be careful with these populists and look at them with as much inquiry as the mainstream, because we have to be aware of this. Mainstream v. populism, divide and rule. Divide and rule is one of the most essential parts of the few controlling the many, and there's endless ways we're divided and ruled. For instance, this was a populist winner, we were told, of the presidential election. But it's a different face and the same mouth. It was just a hoax. This is a man who swum in the swamp all his life, who was going to drain it. And the first thing he did to drain it was hand the American economy to Goldman Sachs. This is a new road sign in America, the Trump turn. Virtually everything he said he would do, he's reneged on, because it was just a way of getting into power by telling people what they wanted to hear. You think Trump is in charge? No more than anyone else ever has been. And yet, because we don't understand this, we have Trump and anti-Trump clashes in America, where they're fighting over two puppets, or two masks on the same puppet. And the political circuit, left and right, when I get into the nature of reality in part 2, is actually an electrical circuit. Left and right need each other to empower each other. It's an electrical circuit. I'll explain what I mean in part 2. And Mark Twain had it: if voting made any difference, they wouldn't let us do it. And that's a great line. So how do we get there? We make them demand their own prison, because it's all a psychological game. And this is the Latin motto of the 33rd degree of Freemasonry: ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. Create the chaos, then offer the order out of the chaos, your order. And I gave the name to this a long time ago now, back in the 90s, Problem, Reaction, Solution, or PRS. And it works like this: covertly create the problem, blame someone else for it, glean the reaction from the public, something must be done, and then third, offer the solution to the problem you have covertly created but blamed on someone else, and that solution is to change society as you plan to change it all along. Problem, reaction, solution is the biggest transformative mind technique of them all. And there's another version that I call no problem, reaction, solution. This is just, here's the word again, this is just the perception of a problem to justify a solution. And there's no better example than weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to justify a catastrophic war. And problem, reaction, solution is based on fear. Fear of what has happened, so that you look to the government to protect you with the solution. How it works: we terrify you and then we do what we want. That's it. Here you go. We fund and arm terrorists and then use them as an excuse to take your freedoms away. Works every time. It's been working for decades and decades and decades. More and more people are realizing it, but it still works. Now, this is Vincenzo Vinciguerra, who was a terrorist with something called Operation Gladio, which is a NATO terrorist network. It means stay behind, and it was formed after the Second World War in Europe, not least Italy. And he is still in jail, as I understand it, for a bomb attack, a terrorist bomb attack in Italy. And this is what he said Operation Gladio was about. You had to attack civilians, the people, women, children, innocent people, unknown people, far removed from any political game. The reason was quite simple. They were supposed to force these people, the Italian public, to turn to the state to ask for greater security. Problem, reaction, solution. And it's a system that I'll call creative destruction. What you do is you destroy the status quo, then you change the status quo. You then destroy that status quo and change the status quo. And every time the status quo changes, you're going further and further down the road to the Hunger Games society that I've been describing. So here's the antidote of problem, reaction, solution. Who benefits? Who benefits from me believing the official version of this problem? And invariably it will be, and if it is, alarm bells should go off, anyone that wants to use the problem to justify the elements of this agenda I'm going to be talking about today, and centralization of power and the destruction of privacy and freedom of speech. And another thing to remember, economists and politicians always tell you to be terrified about things they don't want. See Brexit. So, next one. How do we get there? War. Nothing transforms a society, globally or nationally, than a war. Once the war has happened, big or small, that society is never, ever the same again. And the bigger the war, the longer the war, the greater the transformation of society, which will never return and revert to how it was before. And that is why bombs are the calling cards of the West. They are there to acquire more and more land, more and more resources, and to transform human society. Note, no money for people, but there's always money for war. Always money for war. When's the last time a politician said, we can't go to war, we can't afford it? There's always money for war. This is a recent news story. America tests the most dangerous nuclear bomb ever produced. F-15 drops $1 trillion super nuke. The US war machine's annual budget could buy every homeless American a $1 million home. So why don't they? Because war is crucial to what I'm talking about. They are hungry, let them eat tanks. See, war is good for the agenda because it acquires more land, transforms society. It justifies a police state at home against the baddies. And austerity is good because more and more people get pulled in here. And if you're spending vast amounts on war, you haven't got money to spend on people. And Orwell talked in 1984 about the endless war, the war that never ended. And we have it. It's called the War on Terror. When do you know a war on terror is over? You never know. You know when two people fight and one wins or whatever, it's over. But when does a war on terror end? You never know. You never know when another terrorist attack's coming. Therefore, it's an endless war. The war on terror is a war on freedom to justify the transformation of human society, not least in privacy and freedom of speech. The war of terror has many elements. These are the two major ones. To justify invasion of target countries that you want to invade and take over, and two, to justify the police state at home to protect the people from the terrorists by taking their freedoms away. Fear, fear. Ooh, save us. And this guy, Zbigniew Brzezinski, he was one of the demo cons. He died this year. And when he said what he thought should happen, he was telling you what was going to happen in his books. And Brzezinski wrote The Grand Chessboard in 1997, in which he said that to control the world, you had to control Eurasia, this massive landmass between Europe and China, Russia, down into the Middle East. And I'm going to come back to that after we've been on a little journey of dot connecting. In September 2000, an organization in America called the Project for the New American Century produced a document calling for America to fight multiple theater wars and regime change a list of countries. The Project for the New American Century was created and co-founded by this guy, Kagan, and this guy, Crystal. And they are Israeli American dual citizens. And in this project for the New American Century were Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and these two ran the Pentagon at the time of 9/11 and after, the invasion of Iraq. Dov Zakheim, another Israeli-American dual citizen, he was comptroller of the Pentagon and controlled the entire budget at the time of 9/11 and what happened afterwards. This is a guy called Richard Perle, another Israeli-American dual citizen who was very much a manipulator in the Pentagon while these were involved in fronting it up. Now, what they said in this document in September 2000 was they wanted American forces to fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous major theater wars, and they named the countries they wanted to regime change, September 2000. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, North Korea, China, Lebanon was in there as well. And in January 2001, just a few months, a very small number of months after the document was published, the people that wrote it came to power with the Bush administration, either in front of the camera or behind it. He became, Cheney, the, kind of vice president, the president really, given who was president. He became defense secretary, he became deputy defense secretary, he was comptroller, and he was manipulating in the Pentagon in the background. And so were those two as well, not just in the Pentagon, but also in politics in general. So they came to power in January 2001. And they also said this in that document in September 2000, talking about what they needed to happen to get this process of regime change and multiple theater wars to happen. Further, the process of transformation, regime change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. 9 months after these people came to power in the Bush administration, 1 year to the month that they produced that document, America had what Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century, 9/11. It all started with the attacks of 9/11 and the whole process that that document wanted to happen started to unfold as a result of those attacks. And this guy, General Wesley Clark, he was a NATO Supreme Allied Commander. He wasn't, he's not the nicest man ever to walk the earth either, some of the things he's done. But he was interviewed on a television program, alternative television program on the internet. I think it was 2007. And he said that days after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon, he met Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz, and then he met a general on the Joint Chiefs of Staff that he knew, that was supposed to run the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And this general, he said, told him that they were going to invade Iraq. So he's going, what are we going to invade Iraq for? Were they involved in 9/11? Well, we don't think so. Well, why are you going to invade Iraq? Well, he didn't really know. And probably he didn't because of compartmentalization. So anyway, he goes away and he says he comes back a few weeks later, by which time America is in Afghanistan. And he met the same general at the Pentagon. And he said, why haven't we invaded Iraq? I thought we were going to invade Iraq. And the general said to him, it's worse than that, sir. He said, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I've just had this up from upstairs, Rumsfeld's office. We're going to invade 7 countries in 5 years. And he named them. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, Lebanon, North Korea, etc., that were on that list. Not North Korea, but that was on the list as well. And so he said on this program, which you can see on the internet, that the project for the New American Century had instigated a coup on America And they wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. And that is what has been unfolding ever since, hidden by apparent randomness of war. And let's go back now to Brzezinski's map of Eurasia and all the countries that have since been invaded or demonized, being prepared for invasion, are all in this area of the world. No accident. 9/11 was a problem, reaction, solution to justify what has happened since. And the official story of 9/11 is a joke. Now we come to Operation Northwoods. This was in the 1960s when a guy called Lyman L. Lemnitzer was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon. Note, this is 1962. What I'm about to tell you was being planned. This guy, James Bamford, was a former investigative producer with ABC, and he wrote a book called Body of Secrets about the NSA, the National Security Agency in America. And as part of this, he featured something called Operation Northwoods, which came out of the official American archive. This is not conspiracy theory. This is from the official documents. And this is what was planned to happen in the 1960s with Lemnitzer. Codenamed Operation Northwoods, the plan, which had the written approval of the chairman and every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, called for innocent people to be shot on American streets, for boats carrying refugees fleeing Cuba to be sunk on the high seas, for a wave of violent terrorism to be launched in Washington, D.C., Miami, and elsewhere. People would be framed for bombings they did not commit. Planes would be hijacked. Using phony evidence, all of it would be blamed on Castro, thus giving Lemnitzer and his cabal the excuse, as well as the public and international backing they needed to launch their war. Exactly the techniques that have been used in more recent times. Now, I've been saying for years, others have too, that the planes that left the airport on 9/11, the airports, were not the planes that hit the buildings. And I've been saying, as others have too, that the planes that hit the buildings were controlled from the ground. They were what we now call drones. And, oh God, can they do that? What about the technology? Well, hold on. Let's look at the technology of 1962, when exactly that was planned in Operation Northwoods, as confirmed by official American documents. This is from Operation Northwoods. An aircraft at Elgin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary organization in the Miami area. At a designated time, the duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft, exactly what happened on 9/11, and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. Note how few, ridiculously few passengers there were on those planes, given the time that they left, when there would have been, should have been many more. The actual registered aircraft, Operation Northwoods goes on, would be converted to a drone. Takeoff times of the drone aircraft and the actual aircraft will be scheduled to allow a rendezvous south of Florida. From the rendezvous point, the passenger-carrying aircraft will descend to minimum altitude and go direct into an auxiliary field at Elgin Air Force Base, where arrangements will have been made to evacuate the passengers and return the aircraft to its original status. The drone aircraft, meanwhile, will continue to fly the filed flight plan. When over Cuba, the drone will be transmitting on the international distress frequency a Mayday message stating he is under attack by Cuban MiG aircraft. The transmission will be interrupted by destruction of the aircraft, which will be triggered by radio signal. This will allow the International Civil Aviation Organization radio stations in the Western Hemisphere to tell the US what has happened to the aircraft instead of the US trying to sell the incident. And that was planned for 1962. Kennedy put a stop to it, it seems. And this is why you have a whole organization of airline pilots and aircraft pilots that have come together to say that the story of who flew those planes and how is a nonsense. an impossibility. This is why architects and engineers, some of them at the top of their profession, have got together in the same way and said the explanation of how the buildings came down is a nonsense and impossible. Why? Because it's a lie. The whole thing's a lie. This is Mohammed Atta, the so-called lead hijacker. According to his American white girlfriend, you can see her interview on the internet, his favorite food was pork. Yes, ooh, God, he's extreme Muslim, he is, ooh, ah. That he was often drunk and was constantly, basically, taking cocaine. She also said, because they lived in an apartment in Venice, where the Venice airport is in Florida, where they're supposed to have learned how to fly wide-bodied jets by flying one-engine Cessnas. That makes bloody sense, doesn't it? And she said that when they ran out of cocaine, he would go over to Venice airport and come back with an armful, which explains perfectly other areas of research, which is that Venice airport was a conduit, maybe still is, but certainly was then, for CIA drug operations coming out of South America and onto the streets of America through Venice airport. Attar was one of the people working for the CIA on that drug-running operation. That's why he could go over and get the armful of cocaine. And because he was working for the CIA, he could be put in the wrong place at the wrong time for him while having no idea what the hell was going on. That's why his bag, of all bags in all the world, didn't get on the plane so they could say, oh, look, flight manual, Quran, suicide note. Oh, they'll give them anything. They'll believe anything. And this is Aaron Russo, an award-winning film producer. He worked on Trading Places with Eddie Murphy. And before he died of cancer, he talked about a meeting he had with this guy, Nick Rockefeller, who was trying to recruit him into one of those organizations, one of those cusp organizations I mentioned earlier, the Council on Foreign Relations. And this was 1 year before 9/11. And this is what Russo said Rockefeller told him. There would be an event that would lead to the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, to take over the oil fields and establish a base in the Middle East. Russo would see soldiers looking in caves in Afghanistan and Pakistan for Osama bin Laden. There would be an endless war on terror where there's no real enemy. The whole thing would be a giant hoax. The people have to be ruled, he said, and the population reduced by at least half. And he talked of the plan for microchipping the serfs. And you always have a compliant, unquestioning, pathetic excuse for a mainstream media who will always play their part in demonizing the next target, preparing for invasion and removal. In Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster and the Global Conspiracy Guide, I take 9/11 absolutely apart. Child could do it. Now here's our first quote from 1969, Dr. Richard Day. At that event where he spoke, there was one doctor called Lawrence Donegan who did take notes and later did interviews about what Day said when Donegan realized that what he'd said was happening. And this is what Richard Day said in 1969. There was a discussion, Dr. Donegan said, of terrorism. Terrorism would be used widely in Europe and in other parts of the world. Terrorism at that time was thought not to be necessary in the United States, but it could become necessary if the United States did not move rapidly enough into accepting the new system. Truth cannot be silenced forever. 9/11 was an inside job simply to trigger the sequence of events that we're still seeing unfold. Now, they have their 9/11, they have their problem, and the solution was picking off the countries on the list from September 2000. First of all, they go into Afghanistan and then Iraq. And Iraq, you had Tony Blair in Britain and Boy George Bush in America. And we now know, some of us said it at the time, wrote it at the time, they lied to us, lied for those that control them, about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Why? Because the list said, invade Iraq, remove Saddam Hussein. There was no reason to do it at that time, so they made one up. It is that simple. And let us not forget, mainstream media who ridicule anyone who even questions 9/11, that the very same people, not the same agencies, the same people that told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to justify a catastrophic war and all that's followed, were the same people that told us the official story of 9/11. And yet they accept one, they were lied to now, but still accept 100% what the same people told them about that pivotal event in the transformation of human society. So, Iraq down, now Libya. Now, note, by the time Libya, another one on the list, is ticked off, Bush is gone. Now it's Obama, a Democrat, the other party. Blair's gone. Now it's David Cameron, a conservative, and the other party. And Clinton's in there. But they're picking off the same list. Why? Because that force that controls whoever's in power is driving the whole thing. And so you had this situation where they said that Gaddafi was killing his own people, so to protect them from violence, they bombed them from the air and destroyed the place, turned it into the Stone Age. It's kind of crazy now. Talk to people who've been there, it's unbelievable. It's just mass violence. So what did they do? This is how they do it. They fund and arm freedom fighters, and they attack the regime, in this case, Gaddafi. At this point, politicians in the West, Western media, when the target regime, in this case Gaddafi, starts shooting back, they can't get to a microphone quick enough. He's killing his own people! So send the boys in. And that's how it works. And then Libya down, Syria, and they played the same game there exactly. But a spanner's been thrown in the works to that, as I'll come to. So this is former French Minister for Foreign Affairs, Roland Dumas, on French television, talking about Syria. He said, I'm going to tell you something. I was in England, no, not America, England, one of the major centers of global manipulation, Britain. I'm going to tell you something. I was in England 2 days before the violence in Syria, 2 years rather, before the violence in Syria, on other business. I met with top British officials who confessed to me that they were preparing something in Syria. This was in Britain, not in America. Britain was going or organizing an invasion of rebels into Syria. They even asked me, he said, although I was no longer Minister for Foreign Affairs, if I would like to participate. Naturally, I refused. This operation goes way back. It was prepared, preconceived, and planned. He goes on. This operation goes way back. It was prepared, preconceived, and planned in the region. It is important to know that this Syrian regime has a very anti-Israeli stance. Consequently, and I have this from the former Israeli Prime Minister who told me, we'll try to get on with our neighbors, but those who don't agree with us will be destroyed. And if we're going to understand Israel and why this sliver of land of 8 million people has such an impact on the world, we have to understand that actually it's just a fiefdom of the Rothschilds. Israeli people living in Israel, they're just pawns to these people and don't realize. Just a fiefdom of the Rothschilds. And the idea all along was to take Palestine and get the Palestinians out, take the whole place over, all orchestrated from the start by the House of Rothschild, still being done so. And this week, those of us who have said over the years the plan from the start was to rid the land of Palestinians. They don't want a solution. And this week, a document was declassified from the time of the Six-Day War in 1967, soon after, which reveals in official documents the strategy all along has been to suffocate the Gaza Strip and get rid of Palestinians out of Palestine. And with Trump in power, he gets what the hell he likes. And it's interesting that a leaked email sent by Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State at the time of 9/11, it was leaked, an email from March 2015, and Powell revealed that Israel has 200 nuclear weapons, and apparently all of them, he said, have been aimed at Iran. This is a nuclear weapons program that Israel won't admit to, and America, as part of official policy, does not ask about. So, if you're going to keep invading countries, your target countries, like Iraq, etc., then people are going to go, hold on a second. What do they keep invading countries for? So you do it in a way that gets people in that country to get rid of the regime for you, but under your control. And this is what the Arab Spring was all about. This guy, George Soros, operates a network globally called the Open Society Foundations. Their specialization is manipulating revolutions, particularly ones given the name of a color, and the revolutions of the people, it's called, like Arab Spring. And very recently, it was announced that he had transferred $18 billion to this Open Society Foundation network. So obviously, there's an enormous plan unfolding, or plan to unfold ahead, using that network which he controls. And as well as the Soros network, which cannot be overestimated in its influence, more about him as we go along, there is this document from US Special Forces Unconventional Warfare Strategy, November the 30th, 2010. This is just before the Arab Spring started in Tunisia, and it describes their plan exactly as it unfolded. It says, the US military's unconventional warfare strategy requires that target state population perceptions are first groomed into accepting an armed resurrection, using propaganda and political and psychological efforts to discredit the government, creating local and national agitation, helping organize boycotts, strikes, and other efforts to suggest public discontent before beginning the infiltration of foreign organizers and advisors for foreign propaganda, material, money, weapons, and equipment. Exactly what has happened in the Middle East after that document in September 2000. It goes on. If retaliation by the target government occurs, the resistance can exploit the negative consequences to garner more sympathy and support from the population by emphasizing the sacrifices and hardship the resistance is enduring on behalf of the people. He's killing his own people. And Henry Kissinger said, it is not a matter of what is true that counts, but what is perceived to be true. It's all about manipulating perception so that people will support. You look at perception. What is perception? It dictates what we think, what we don't think, what we'll challenge, what we won't challenge, what we'll support, what we won't support. Perception is everything, and that's the battleground. And how powerful perception manipulation is. This was a poll in America where 30% in the poll wanted to bomb Agrabah, which is a fictional town in Aladdin. That's how easy it is. And now, Mr. Populist man, Mr. Anti-Establishment man comes into power. It's all going to change now. And the demonization of these countries has continued under him, all countries on the same list, and Lebanon. I say in my new book, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, which I only kind of finished like very few weeks ago. Watch for Lebanon being demonized, because it's on the it's on the list, and they'll come for that. Look what's happening with Lebanon now, suddenly out of nowhere. Israel calls on Arab states to befriend Israel and team up against Iran. They want Iran. This is where it's all building. And this new crown prince, again, I mentioned him in the new book and his background, this crown prince in Saudi Arabia who's imprisoned all these billionaires and fellow princes to get control of Saudi Arabia, he is completely owned by Israel and the United States, and that's why his rhetoric now is, we must deal with Iran. It's all a script. It's all a movie script. It is not a random series of events. And where they want it to lead, and it doesn't have to, if we get our asses in gear, they want it to lead to World War III. You look at the 3 world wars. First of all, the status quo as it was before World War I was destroyed by World War I. They then change the status quo, and they move on to the Second World War. They destroy the new status quo. And now they want to destroy this status quo and impose another one. And it was all described in a letter alleged to come from this man called Albert Pike, in a letter in 1871, according to a Canadian naval intelligence officer. This guy, Albert Pike, was a major Freemason, very high Freemason, sovereign Grand Commander. And in this letter, which was revealed by this intelligence agent in the 1950s, he described 3 world wars. Now, he described the First World War accurately, described the Second World War accurately. But it only came to light through this guy in the 1950s. So the first 2 wars, forget them, not relevant to accuracy. So we've only got the Third World War left. And what he said would happen is that there would be a conflict between what he called political Zionism and the Islamic world, which would draw in, like a vortex, more and more countries until it was a world conflict. He said that in the run-up to this Third World War, they would, quote, unleash the nihilists on the world. And nihilism is defined as a political belief or action that advocates or commits violence or terrorism without discernible constructive goals. ISIS and these other terrorist groups to a T. And I would say it also fits this Antifa, who are very much in the control of people like George Soros, as I'll come to. And so we reached the point. I said in the 1990s that the plan was the Third World War involving China. And here we have the Pentagon now listing Russia and China as top global threats and saying that they must increase the budget to meet the threat. And of course, Russia, out of nowhere, until very relatively recently, was being left alone. But now, the demonization of Russia is almost laughable. Look, Russia wants war. Look how close it put its country to our military bases. It obviously wants he wants trouble. The NATO war machine. And what it is, it's simple. Demonize, destroy. Demonize, destroy. Demonize, prepare the public mind to destroy. This is how it works. This is why they're demonizing Russia now. Russia has not seen such an amassing of hostile military forces on its borders since 1941. And Lithuania and Estonia signed milestone deals on status of US troops on their soil. In other words, they're being occupied increasingly by US troops. And the propaganda for 2-year-olds, it's the Russians are coming. When in fact, NATO is coming onto the borders of Russia. And Hermann Goering, of course, a famous Nazi, had it right when he said, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. That's how the Nazis worked. That's how these Nazis are working. And I'm not saying Putin is a Sunday school teacher or anything like, but the idea that he's Stalin who wants to roll the Russian military across Europe is such a joke. It's unbelievable. And this is the Third World War agenda made simple. It's the Russians. Everything is the frickin' Russians. I've got a cold. It's the Russians. I've got a flat. It's the Russians. I burnt the toast. It's the Russians. Can't trust them. Russia hacked the US election. Ah! Evidence. Bugger all. Made it up. These are declassified files that have just come out, which are involved from 1962 again, this guy Lemnitzer of Operation Northwoods, and they are plans to fake a Russian attack, blame it on the Soviet Union to justify a war. This is not new. Those two countries could work together, but they're not meant to work together, and so they're driven apart on purpose. We have a military government increasingly in the Trump administration, and we have, sleep well, a man called Mad Dog Mattis, who is deciding military policy and direction in the United States, the biggest military on earth by a mile. And if you go for Iran, you get China and Russia, and the three come together. And that's the plan. That's where they want to take it. So the next thing is create the enemy. How do we get there to the Hunger Games Society? This is a world exclusive. This is ISIS headquarters. It's been found. It's been... because you have to create an enemy. Now, what we call ISIS and all these other groups came out of the Pentagon through the Mujahideen and the Taliban in Afghanistan, through Al-Qaeda, through to Islamic State, Boko Haram in Africa as well. Zbigniew Brzezinski talked to the media in France, it's a news magazine, some years ago now, and he admitted that when he was National Security Advisor to President Jimmy Carter, they funded into existence something called the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, specifically to attack the Soviet satellite regime in Kabul, Afghanistan, to force the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan, and in his words, give the Soviet Union their Vietnam. It cost 1 million Afghan lives, but these guys don't give a damn. And from the Mujahideen, became morphed into the Taliban, which morphed into Al-Qaeda. And the former British foreign minister, a guy called Robin Cook, said just before he died of a heart attack out of nowhere that Al-Qaeda means the base or the database, because Al-Qaeda was created from the database by the CIA and America, from the database of Mujahideen fighters that they had on the database to fight against the Russians. This is how it works. You've got the hidden hand in the shadows coming down through secret societies, through military intelligence, through terror group leaders, and then you've got the rank and file terrorists who haven't got a freaking clue why they're doing what they're doing or what the ultimate masters are. They are basically idiots, programmed idiots, very dangerous and deeply, not just misguided, but crazy, lunatic idiots, but idiots all the same. It's not coming from them. This is a guy called Saeed Ramzi. It's not his real name for obvious reasons. He was an undercover reporter for French TV, and he infiltrated a cell of terrorists in Europe who were supposed to be carrying out terrorist attacks in Europe. And this is what he said. The militants had very little understanding of Islam. They were fast food jihadists. One of the main lessons was that I never saw any Islam in this affair. No will to improve the world, only lost, frustrated, suicidal, easily manipulated youths who had been promised a palace, a winged horse of gold and rubies in the afterlife if they would take part in these terrorist attacks and suicide bombings. And what we're looking at is not Islam. We're looking at something called Wahhabism, which is the creation, as I explain in some detail in this new book, the creation of the British Empire and the House of Saud. This is why the House of Saud was the immediate creator, with Western money as well, and aid and weapons, of ISIS. And if you look at ISIS and Saudi Arabia and how they work, the only difference between the two is ISIS is perceived as a US enemy and Saudi Arabia is perceived, shockingly, as a US ally. Everything else is the same, including beheading people. And declassified Pentagon report, US created ISIL as a tool against Assad. Create the enemy, then you can get the excuse to go into a country. US effectively siding with Al-Qaeda in desire to get rid of Assad, former UK ambassador to Syria. Merchants of death, Obama, Clinton run weapons to ISIS from Libya, say intelligence documents. Hacked emails prove Hillary armed jihadis in Syria, including ISIS. And this guy was about to go into court on charges of supplying weapons to Libyan rebels. And before he went into court, he said, if I go in the witness box, I'm going to reveal Hillary Clinton's part in it. She was Secretary of State, of course. And they let him go and drop the charges, and off he went to go on with his life. Huge stash of US-made weapons found in ISIS-controlled territory in Syria on purpose. This is an organization called Action on Armed Violence. They found that 1.45 million guns were supplied by the US to Afghanistan and Iraq between 2001 and 2015, and only 3% of those weapons have been accounted for. Where did the others go? Well, it's obvious where they went. These are the flags of the real ISIS, created to justify all that's gone on in the Middle East, create the enemy and justify a war and a conflict. But this guy came in, Putin and the Russian Air Force, and they threw a spanner in the works. All these militaries were getting nowhere. ISIS was continuing to head to Damascus. He comes in, or the Russian military come in the Air Force, supporting the Assad military, and suddenly ISIS starts getting swept back. Why? Because they weren't frickin' trying, that's why. And as the Russians have removed ISIS from most of Syria, they're still trying to justify getting rid of Assad through military means by lying about the use of chemical weapons on his own people, when there's absolutely no need and every need for him not to do that, given that he would know he was giving them an excuse to do what he knows they want to do. And then we have the White Helmets, who are a West-funded, EU-funded, British Foreign Office-funded front organization, who have put out these pictures like here. They're looking after children who were hit by a sarin attack. And as experts in sarin have said from various countries, if they were dealing with people in a sarin attack with that protection, they would all have been dead in next to no time. It's all a hoax to problem, reaction, solution. Assad out of Syria. And long term, going back 30 years, Israel has had a plan to break up the Middle East, balkanize the Middle East into smaller units to allow them to have more control and to introduce what they call the Greater Israel, which is massively bigger than the present one. And now we're having these various elements that have taken over parts of Syria that are not part of the Assad regime, who are now saying we're not going to hand over that land to Assad, and so Syria is in danger of being balkanized. So this Greater Israel project, 30 years at least, it goes back further, but 30 years we've known about it anyway, is what the plan is, to balkanize the Middle East, as in the Balkans after the former Yugoslavia fell. And this is the other point of targeting Russia, Ukraine. Russia invading Ukraine, they say. Well, the coup in Ukraine that got rid of that Yanukovych again and put someone else in was orchestrated by this lady, Victoria Nuland. And she happens to be the wife of that guy, Kagan, one of the co-founders of the Project for the New American Century. It's all a movie script. And she was the one that put Poroshenko into power in Ukraine. So the moral West is a killing machine. And it's a killing machine because war is and terrorism is a fundamental part of pushing and installing this Hunger Games society. Voltaire said, "It is forbidden to kill, therefore all murderers are punished unless they kill in large numbers and to the sound of trumpets." And the real war criminals, they never get into the war crimes court. Only the losers, never them. The war criminals that have killed more people than you can even begin to imagine. So how do we stop war? We stop Britain, America, and the rest of the moral West from starting them. That's how we stop them. How do we get there? Engineered terrorism. We terrify you, and then we do what we want. They have their problem, they have their reaction, now watch them play out their pre-planned solution. Every time there's a terrorist attack, there is a common recurring sequence, and that is it's used to justify the deletion of freedom and the further imposition of the military police state. Thousands of jihadis going to kill you. We must take your freedoms. This is the mantra. Terrorist attack after terrorist attack. Who benefits from terrorist attacks? Anyone that wants to introduce the Hunger Games society. CIA agent on terrorism. Stories manufactured by elite to keep us killing each other. Exactly. Nice attacks. Destroying evidence at crime scene, French government orders destruction of CCTV video footage. Why would a government want to destroy video footage of a terrorist attack? Because it doesn't show what the official narrative says happened. That's why. That's why again and again, video surveillance cameras are not working when there is a terrorist attack, because the official story is not what happened. This is what terrorist attacks are designed to do, to get people into that state, and then they'll give their power away. Oh, yeah, I don't want you to take me freedom, but you've got to protect us. Here, have it. That's how it works. And it works brilliantly. Berliners call for more CCTV, with 83% saying more public areas should be covered by cameras in the wake of the Christmas market killings. Germany debates putting troops on streets to protect against terrorism. France to form National Guard amid calls to step up security. Armed SAS troops with shoot-to-kill orders are deployed on London Underground to monitor suspicious passengers. These now airport security controls are how you get into the Manchester Arena to see a music concert as a result of the bomb attack there this year. And what all this terrorism is about is giving the justification to build the police military state in the center of this Hunger Games pyramid to hold that status quo and the majority in servitude and control. That's what it is. Richard Day said in that event in 1969, everything has two purposes. One is the ostensible purpose, which will make it acceptable to people, and second is the real purpose, which would further the goals of establishing the new system. People are too trusting. People don't ask the right questions. And ironically, the ones that don't ask the right questions, most importantly and most often, are journalists. So, because so many of these terrorist attacks are actually staged to allow a problem, reaction, solution, you see common themes in them. If it works, keep doing it. First of all, a terrorist passport is found again and again. A terrorist identifies the cause, God is great, and an anti-terrorism drill is often happening at the same time, which mirrors what actually happened. Someone on the internet was talking about passports, and they said, would you please send me your passports, because I want to build a bomb-proof shelter. And clearly, passports are indestructible. I mean, if you lose your passport, call the security forces, because they find them everywhere. I was I was watching the BBC News. I was watching the BBC News after the September the 11th, a few days afterwards, and a BBC newsreader told me, without laughing, that the FBI, New York police, had found a passport from one of the hijackers that had come out one of the planes. Her name was Fiona Bruce. I thought she was going to laugh in a minute. She never did. And what they said was, there's a place right next to Ground Zero called Vesey Street, and they found the passport there. I mean, was it singed? I'm fireball, paper passport. I think there's some law of physics in there somewhere. During the London bombings known as 7/7 in 2005, there was a guy on a tube train with a backpack who's supposed to have blown himself to pieces. They found his passport and his mobile phone insurance in the backpack. But just before they found it in the tube, they just happened to have raided his house and gone through it. Paris as well, passport. They got a passport. Is them Arabs? Is them Islams? Then there's the drill, the miracle drill, which is happening at the same time as the real thing is happening. How many people, well, many people in this room maybe, but in general, realize that on the morning of September the 11th, of all the mornings in all the years in all the world, that there were a stream of exercises going on in the skies over the eastern seaboard where the 9/11 planes were, that were planned long before, and they were exercises practicing scenarios for planes being hijacked, including one scenario which was that the plane would be flown into a building in Washington, D.C. I've seen the logs from the morning from an organization called NORAD, which is supposed to protect America from the skies, attacks from the skies and things like these hijackings. And as the reports of the real 9/11 planes came in, it was clear NORAD staff were totally confused. They were saying things like, is this real or is this exercise? And because all these planes were taking part in the exercise, they weren't in the positions they normally would have been at that morning, which is why they took so long to react to the planes and everything that happened before they arrived. It was a total scam, and Dick Cheney was massively involved on one level with it. Boston Marathon, there was a drill going on that mirrored what happened when that went on. Same in Paris and a stream of mass shootings in America. Again and again, the FBI has been found out being involved in people planning terrorist attacks, even encouraging those attacks, again and again. Look at this thing. Have you seen this joke of an official narrative in Las Vegas over this shooting? It started changing by the hour. And here we have a classic, as I mentioned earlier. 2001, 9/11, 85 surveillance cameras failed to capture even 1 second of a video of a Boeing 757 crashing into the Pentagon. 2017, 2,000 surveillance cameras, actually more, failed to capture even 1 second of a man carrying 47 guns, ammo, cameras, and 2 shooting platforms into that hotel room. Joke! It's all a perception deception. We want video cameras everywhere except when we're doing something. Okay, how do we get there? World Army Police State. This is the American military budget, and it's bigger than all those countries put together, because the American military is the military of the web. They all are, but particularly the American military. That's why it does what it does. The US military is in 147 countries and taking over the world by claiming to save it, and it has arrogantly, for reasons I'll come to in a sec, broken up the world into a series of comms or commands, all controlled and parts of the American military global reach. And the reason that's been done is not actually for the American military. This is the structure being created for the World Army structure, which is planned to take over, and the American military will then be part of that. And that's why it's being done. North Atlantic Terrorist Organization, NATO, and these other things like the European Army they're planning, which I talked about in the 1990s, etc., the UN peacekeeping operation, that's planned to be all merged into a world army to impose the will of the world government. And I said earlier that it's planned to be a military police operation. Everything the same organization. And that's one of the reasons why the police are looking more and more and more like the military all the time. In America, through something called the 1033 program, where the Pentagon gives military equipment to even local police forces, police officers are going around in tanks in America. Militarization of the police out of control, that's what it's planned to be. Armed forces will patrol streets in armored vehicles to protect Britons from ISIS attacks over Bank Holiday weekend. This is how it's being used. We're seeing this military police force coming in, of course now increasingly from the air with drones, and laws against everything so that more and more control can be imposed through more and more laws. Border Patrol launches program to scan the face of every person leaving US. This is how many kids in parts of America go to school, through airport surveillance and security. And what that's doing, and why they are putting cameras all over schools, why they are putting fingerprint recognition technology in schools to get library books, why they are putting this surveillance technology in schools under the excuse of protecting children, is nothing to do with that. It's programming the children's minds to accept constant total control for the rest of their lives in wider society as the normal, how things are. You know, when you come into this world, you tend to think, well, this is how things are when you come into the world. So I'm 65 now. I know I don't look it, but I'm 65 now. And therefore, I was born in 1952. I remember when this world was very different. I have a compass because of that to see how things have changed. You're born into this now. This is your normal. And that's the plan, to make this mass surveillance just normal. And this fantastic scale of surveillance now, in every area of our lives, fine detail, that is just for terrorism. You're having a laugh. And don't let anyone, we need to know this. We need to know it's happening. But don't let anyone kid themselves that they don't want us to know the scale of surveillance. They do. Because of this. It's a study which shows that mass surveillance breeds meekness, fear, and self-censorship. If you think you're being put under surveillance, then you don't say things. You don't do things. The thought of being under surveillance changes your life. That's why they want us to know. Big brother state everywhere. Anyone in the media asks why? It's terrorism bullshit. It's to create this police surveillance state to stop rebellion against what is happening. For this reason, I said years and years and years ago that this stuff that was then operating under the radar would have to break the surface at some point where it can be seen. Otherwise, they can't change society in the way that this is planned to do. It's now broken. It's now broken the surface for anyone with a mind to see. And they have a period of time before they lock everything down where they're in the open. And the idea is to push this police surveillance state on as fast as possible so that they have the ability to control rebellion when enough people have looked up and gone, God, so that's what's happening. Yes, all through your life it's been happening. And they want to stop that by having this surveillance state in place. And if anyone wants to know, or I get a glimpse of what this military police state is supposed to be like, then just remember what happened in Catalonia to the Catalans when they were attacked by the police in the most extraordinary ways while they were simply standing there waiting to cast their vote. This is coming soon unless we get our asses in gear. And that is why these front groups try to use racism to silence me, because this is the real stuff they don't want to come out. How do we get there? Globalization and centralization. When there's a few of you and you want to control the many, then you have to constantly centralize decision-making. The more you centralize decision-making, the more power the few have over the many. And this is why the centralization of global power has been incessant and goes on being incessant. Globalism, this is what they want us to think it is, everyone coming together. This is what it really is, handing power to the tiny few over everyone else. And they're doing it through a process which is very much connected to problem, reaction, solution, that I call the totalitarian tiptoe. This means you start at A and you know you're going to Z, a full-blown Orwellian fascist global state. But if you go in too bigger leaps, the change is so obvious, people will look up from the game show and the sport and say, what's going on? So what you do is you go as fast as you can, but not so fast that you alert too many people to the pattern. You are promoting every step as unconnected to the other steps. And I call it the totalitarian tiptoe. And what they want is this structure with these super states under the top structure of the world government. And these are being brought about, like everything else, through the totalitarian tiptoe. And that's what has turned a free trade area in Europe into a global fascist communist state, bureaucratic state, fascist communist, choose whatever name you like, they're both the same, just another label, for centralization of power. And this is Jean Monnet, one of the founding fathers of the EU, or a founding father, the founding father in many ways of what became the EU, and a Rothschild frontman. He said this in a letter to a friend the day after I was born, 65 years ago. Europe's, when they were saying it's just a free trade area, nothing to worry about, good for jobs. Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what is happening. This can be accomplished by successive steps, each disguised as having an economic purpose, but which will eventually and irreversibly lead to federation, totalitarian tiptoe. And this week, it's come out in a secret British government document locked away for 30 years to show how this man, a paedophile and Satanist, by the way, Edward Heath, Prime Minister who signed us into what became the EU, he and his mates lied up to the British people about the consequences of entering the common market when they knew exactly where it was meant to lead. So this is the European Union, democracy in action. We'll give them a parliament with no power and we can call it a democracy when the dark suits in Brussels control it all. And this is the relationship between countries and Britain and the EU, there you go. And that's why the majority of people in the referendum, Brexit, voted to come out. Now the empire strikes back. The political class in Britain and the political class in Brussels and the political classes throughout the countries of Europe are trying to stop Brexit happening, or at least dilute it to the extent that it's not worth happening in the first place. And ironically, many of the people, the mindset known as progressive, I'll come to that later, who go on marches now saying we must stay in the EU, are the same people, many of them, who go on marches against globalization and against trade agreements giving massive power to centralized power in the hands of corporations. And they're so bewildered, they don't realize that the centralization of power in the EU and the centralization of power we call globalization are aspects of the same agenda for total globalization of power. And the corporations increasingly are running the world, not governments, and this web controls the corporations. 100 biggest economies in the world now, 51 are corporations, only 49 are countries. Top 200 corporations, bigger than 182 countries combined. 147 corporations account for 40% of global trade. And everywhere I go, small business and middling business, even much bigger business that are not giant corporations, are complaining that they are being destroyed and demolished by red tape and regulation that they have to deal with just to run a business. That is not an accident. Small and medium business, even bigger businesses, like I say, are being targeted for destruction because in the world of the Hunger Games society, only giant corporations controlled by the same force will be selling, making everything. And that is happening in front of our eyes now in the retail world, and it's called Amazon. $1 in every two in the United States online goes to Amazon. Now, interdependence, loss of dependence. The reason for centralization of power, not least in Europe, is to take control of communities away from them so there's no self-sufficiency, there's no ability to decide what happens in their own area because it's all being dictated over here. And the only people that have control of everything are those that control the system. Everyone else within the system is dependent on elsewhere and others in the system, and that's what this is all about, the interdependence through loss of independence. And in the Hunger Games Society movie series, they broke up the country into various areas which specialized in various specializations of production or agriculture or whatever. And then in the capital, that's where what I would call now the 1% or less than 1% lived, and everyone else was in servitude, specializing in these various things, and that's how they stitched the world up. That is just a metaphor for the world of the Hunger Games Society. Richard Day revealed it all in 1969. The stated plan was that different parts of the world would be assigned different roles of industry and commerce in a unified global system. The continued preeminence of the United States and the relative independence and self-sufficiency of the United States would have to be changed. And that is what has happened ever since, and that's what outsourcing to poor countries and China and all the rest of it has been about. Now, I said earlier about the world of regions. They don't want nation states. All these social engineering wish lists, they invariably include not just the breakup of the family, but the end of nation states. And they have a problem in doing that because of people's sense of history, their sense of culture, their sense of uniqueness. And I love all that. When I go around the world, it's just so sad when you see things all becoming the same. And so they have a problem with a sense of culture, a sense of nationhood, a sense of history. And that's what this is about. This has been planned, the migrant crisis into Europe has been planned for decades and decades and decades. And here we go, Richard Day, 1969. There would be mass movements and migrations of people without roots in their new locations because traditions are easier to change in a place where there are a lot of transplanted people as compared to trying to change traditions in a place where people grew up and had an extended family where they had roots. That is what is happening. And they want us to see everything in black and white, in pieces and not dots. Them and us, bad guys and good guys. What's actually happening is the migrants coming in large numbers and the indigenous population are being played off against each other, pawns in the same game, and the same hands are holding the strings of both. Now, for reasons I'll come to in part 3, and there is a reason, this network of families and secret societies that are driving this, at one level anyway, it goes much deeper than them, they have an inability to feel what we would call human emotion. They do not have this key fail-safe mechanism of human behavior, empathy, being able to put yourself in the position of someone else and their feelings. But they know the target population has, or much of it has, and they manipulate emotion mercilessly because they know that that is a very powerful weapon. Now, so many young children and children in general have lost their lives trying to get across the Mediterranean, trying to get into Europe, from countries that have been devastated by the same people orchestrating the migrant crisis. just dominoes falling. They knew what would happen. But they picked this one, this little boy found on the beach of Turkey, who was trying with his family to get across the Med to Europe and then on into Canada. And they picked it up. Of course, the media picked it up globally. And there was a wave of understandable emotion for that extraordinarily emotive picture. And as a result of that, Merkel opened the doors of Germany, not just to people who were fleeing war and persecution. You know, fair enough. Oh, yeah, let's do that. But to anybody, without any checks, nothing, anybody. I just open them up. And people in Germany, many people anyway, were on the platforms clapping them in and welcoming them. Why? Because at that time, every one of those people coming off those trains was that little boy on the beach in Turkey. Emotion. And they worked this mercilessly. And then, of course, endless people coming in, not fleeing war, most of them. I'm all for that, for helping those people, absolutely. But overwhelmingly, adult men, young, often mostly adult men, with all the problems that was going to cause. And people in Germany I know were like shocked that Merkel could just do that. Why would she do it? Because Angela Merkel is controlled by this web to her DNA and her fingertips. She is serving this, not the people of Germany, just like the people in Britain are serving the same web and not the people of Britain. And therefore, she does what the agenda wants, not what is good for Germany, not what is good for harmony in Germany or any of those things. And that's why she did it. And here he is again. Leaked Soros memo, refugee crisis, new normal, gives new opportunities for global influence. This guy is massively behind the migrant crisis in Europe through his networks foundations and this global Open Society Foundation. And in the new book, Everything You Need to Know But Had Never Been Told, I expose this in some detail because it's important to know. And I was in Hungary just a few weeks ago, and on the bus stops in Hungary and on the billboards, there are posters of Soros, which the government has put up, exposing what this guy is doing. Everywhere this guy is. That's why he's been allowed to become this multi-billionaire, and the deal is a great deal of that money is then spent to advance the agenda. This is Viktor Orbán, Prime Minister of Hungary, on George Soros. His name is perhaps the strongest example of those who support anything that weakens nation states. They support everything that changes the traditional European lifestyle. That's what this is all about. And both the migrants coming in and the indigenous population are both pawns in the same game. And they want the two to be at war with each other. Farage has just been talking about Soros. It's been in my books for years, this guy. Now others are starting to see him in the mainstream. In America, a local news program exposed that he's doing the same in the United States. Exactly the same. And what they want to do, usual way of the few controlling the many, they want to divide and rule. Play culture off against culture, migrant off against indigenous population. And the more terrorist attacks they are, the more terrorist attacks they can stage, the more anger the indigenous population it generates. So you have surging inter-community confrontations in France, means civil war is inevitable. Thousands take to streets to protest Germany's immigration policy following week of bloody violence. And they're doing the same in America, playing off Trump supporters against anti-Trump, this faction against this faction, slaves fighting slaves for the slave owners. That's what they're doing. The more fault lines between us they can create, the more slaves they have fighting slaves. The elite wants a race war. And he's behind that as well. Not him personally, he's not sitting at a desk and destroying it all. The network he controls and funds is doing it. And Soros is just like Brzezinski was. When he's telling you what he thinks should happen or will happen, he's telling you what is planned to happen. And he's predicted riots, police state, and civil war for America. Exactly what has unfolded since he predicted it. And this is what this white supremacist against Antifa stuff is all about. Faction against faction, civil war, that's what they want. And here's a leaked tax return. George Soros sent more than $1.7 million to Antifa. It's all orchestrated, all of it. And if people don't get their heads together and realize they're pawns in a game they don't understand, they'll go on being pawns in a game. And all of them will end up in this Hunger Games society. Pawns fight over puppet. Trump against anti-Trump. Our mask on the same face is better than yours. Wake up! And that's why I said earlier, be very careful. We should be very careful about mainstream being played off against populism, because any divide and rule is good for this agenda. All lives matter. Why can't we just realize I'll get into this in part two. Part two for me is just about the most important part of what we need to know. But we are awareness having an experience. We are a point of attention with infinite awareness having different experiences. We call them races. We call them belief systems. We call them religions. We call them income brackets. But they're experiences. And if we self-identify with the experience instead of being that awareness having the experience, then those experiences, believed to be self, phantom self, are just waiting to get played off against each other. How do we get there? Create and control money. Massive one. The Rothschilds. We are the banking system in many ways. They created it out of Frankfurt, Germany. This is Nathan Rothschild, who created the Rothschild Empire in Britain. I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. Control the world money supply, and you control the world. Give a man a gun, and he can rob a bank. Give a man a bank, and he can rob the world. Give the man the banking system, and he'll run the world. And the banking system is controlled ultimately from the spider and comes out into the scene as individual banks, but in the end it's one bank, controlled by one web. And so you have the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, the World Bank, the central banks like the Federal Reserve in America of countries, and they're all controlled by the same web, and they're all operating to the same agenda. That's why they can crash the economy or lift the economy at will, whenever they choose. Now, one of the major vehicles for this is the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. This is a private banking organization made up of the heads of the central banks of the countries of the world, where they meet regularly to orchestrate a common policy through all of them. This policy comes down from the Bank of International Settlements, down through national central banks, why wouldn't it? The heads have decided it, down through government economic policy, and down to the people who have to suffer the consequences. The hidden hand comes down through secret societies, the financial elite, the banking system, government policy, and the people. That's how it works. And it's based on a criminal activity, organized crime, which is lending people money that doesn't exist, called credit, and charging them interest on it. And when you go into a bank and you say, have a loan of 50,000 euros, that bank does not move precious metals anywhere. It doesn't move physical money anywhere. Precious metals, none of it. It types into your account 50,000 euros that has never, does not, and will never exist, called credit. From that moment, you're paying back 50,000 euros plus interest. Now, this is the point. When you take out the loan, the bank creates the loan. It does not create the interest. Thus, there is systematically, on purpose, never ever enough money in circulation, credit, whatever form it takes, to pay back all the outstanding debt and all the principal on the outstanding debt, or the interest, rather, on the outstanding debt. Thus, people losing their homes, their businesses, their land, their possessions, are all written into the fabric of the banking system. And what has happened also is that because the same people, the same web has controlled governments, has controlled the banking system, laws have been passed to allow banks to lend, at least 10 times what it has in deposit, called fractional reserve lending. You don't have to have the money to lend it. So you put a euro in a bank, it can now lend 9, 10 to someone else and charge them interest on it. And it's just credit, it's just figures on the screen, it doesn't exist. And because of this, they've taken the world over. This was a poll of British politicians. 80% of them did not know how money is created. And some of them will be on financial committees making financial decisions. They didn't realize that money is created by banks lending fresh air money called credit that has never, does not, and will never exist except in theory. And because of this, the banking system and those who control it have spent centuries swapping fresh air credit for wealth that does exist, resources, homes, businesses, etc. And in that way, they have stolen the real wealth of the world for handing over fresh air money. And it's still going on. I lost my home. I couldn't pay back money that doesn't exist. Incredible, but true. Billionaire presidency, man of the people. More billionaires in the current American administration than ever before. While there's a war on the homeless. Even laws in America against feeding the homeless. This is the Hunger Games society unfolding in front of our eyes. The idea is to crush the population into subservience. And because they want everybody, this is why they're targeting now what people call the middle class. Middle class in Europe, middle class in America is slightly different, but that's what they're targeting, the middle class. Huge companies are already bleeding the middle class dry, so why do we want to give them tax cuts? Because we want to create the Hunger Games society. And the idea is to make everyone a slave by taking their money and forcing them into this lower level of the Hunger Games society. And one way they plan to do it is this. There's been a development this week, which is another confirmation of what I've been saying for years and years and years and years. Up to relatively recently, last few years, when banks collapsed, as we saw in 2008, the governments hosed money at the banks to bail them out. And the people that crashed the banks actually ended up far richer, and the people ended up in austerity because of all the money that had been borrowed by the government, which they have to pay back. But they've moved to something else now. Since 2013, and the banking collapse in Cyprus, they've gone from bailouts to bail-ins. Policy in Europe now, and further afield in the world. This means that when a bank collapses, the governments don't bail them out using the people's money. The banks and the governments go straight to the depositors' bank accounts in those banks and just take the money. That's what happened in Cyprus. A lot of rich people with money in those banks weren't so rich afterwards. Most of it was taken. The bail-in, simple. You change the law so you can go to people's bank accounts and just take the money if there's a banking collapse, and then you instigate a banking collapse. And that is what is planned. And people say money is safe in the bank. No, you're just an unsecured creditor. And here's that development. Up to this point in Europe, if a bank collapses, the government has guaranteed 100,000 euros will be paid back to you in this bail-in and what have you. In Britain, it's 85,000 pounds. This week, the European Central Bank wants to end that. Stop that guarantee and only have discretionary payments by a competent authority on the basis of what it perceives is appropriate amount of your money that they should let you have access to. And the idea is to use the bail-in to steal the money of people who think now that they're okay. And this is a theme. Austria just announced a 54% haircut. That's the jargon for taking the money. A haircut of senior creditors in first bail-in under new European rules. Taxman's plan to covert raids on family bank accounts. Belgian government applies retroactive tax and removes funds from citizens' bank accounts. Australian pensioners and savers have bank accounts raided by the government. This is where we're going. And this is one of the key things that they have in waiting to crash the global economy, and that's something called the derivatives market, which is supposed to be worth trillions of dollars, and is worth probably, a round of drinks, because they sell the same thing over and over again, and each one thinks it actually exists, and it doesn't. It's a fresh air, and when people look down and realize it's fresh air, bang. They want it all. They want it all, and that's why the wealthiest, when I started this world tour in 2016, the world's wealthiest 62 people were worth the same as the poorest half of the world population combined. The latest figures I've seen is down to something in single figures. And they don't pay tax, and people sleep in the streets while they don't pay tax. And this is another key part of what I was talking about earlier. Since the 1990s in my books, I've said the plan is to get rid of cash and have a cashless society, which is fundamentally about freedom. Because if you go into a shop now and you hand over a credit card, which is, money, electronic money, cashless society, in effect, when that computer says, no, it won't accept your card, you can still pay cash. When there's no cash and that computer says it won't accept your card, or with microchip, as it's planned to be after that, then you've got no means of purchasing apart from barter. And the idea is to make barter illegal on the basis of you can't tax it. This is the plan. But cashless society, oh, it's so convenient. Anyone think they're going to make accepting your own prison inconvenient? So, how do we get there? Global warming, climate change. I'll whip through this as fast as I can. This is another element of it. The global warming hoax, as I would call it, is about finding an excuse to transform global society. And it's about fear again, fear of the end of the world. And here's some global warming activists campaigning for their own enslavement. Because they just don't look at the evidence. They look at part of the evidence. This is Martin Luther King. He said, nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And it remains so to this day. And who is behind the progressive movement that is the driving force behind changing the world because of global warming? George Soros and his Open Society Foundations. This is from last year. They had a big event in Washington, D.C. called Democracy Spring, remember, Arab Spring, where they were campaigning against billionaires' involvement in politics. And key organizations that organize that are funded by him, a billionaire manipulating politics. And this is what he said, I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do. So why is Soros one of the major funders of the so-called progressive organizations and movements in Europe and in North America? Because it's a scam. Rockefeller, Ford Foundations behind World Socialist Forum, the corporate funding of social activism. Why do these people want to fund activism? Because of this. If you want to control a game, then if you control one side, you'll influence the game. You control both sides and the referee, you know the outcome before the game starts. That's why they're funding both sides. And progressives, as they're called, non-liberal progressives, need to get their heads around the way that they're being manipulated. So before we get into global warming and all that stuff, this is important. The United Nations, what is it? It's a stalking horse for world government. It's part of the totalitarian tiptoe to a fully blown world government. And it was fundamentally influenced in its creation by the House of Rothschild and, in America, the House of Rockefeller. J.D. Rockefeller was very much involved in the creation of the League of Nations, which was the first effort at a global body after World War I. When that didn't quite work, they had another go with the United Nations after World War II, and the New York UN building was given, the land on which it's built was given free, and think what that would be worth, by the Rockefeller family. So we go to this this group of cusp organizations from that web earlier, which answer to a secret society in Britain called the Round Table. There's details all in my books. One of them is the Council on Foreign Relations, which has driven to such a large extent American foreign policy since it was created in 1921. They go and sing for their supper at the Council on Foreign Relations from the State Department there. Now, J.D. Rockefeller funded the creation of the CFR, as it's called, in 1921, paid its ongoing expenses, and provided the headquarters, which is still there in New York to this day. That's relevant because at the creation of the United Nations, after the Second World War, 74 members of the American delegation that created the UN were members of the Rockefeller Council on Foreign Relations. And so there you have the United Nations, a Rockefeller-Rothschild organization, a stalking horse for world government. And the climate change hoax is being driven through the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was headed for a long time by a railway engineer who would have made a greater gift to the world if he'd gone and mended some trucks or something, or changed some points. And the United Nations is also driving this, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. These are agendas, they're basically the same agenda, or one's an advance on the other, to transform global society. And one of the major justifications of doing that is the climate change hoax being driven through the same United Nations. These are United Nations climate change officials. This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model. Another one, we redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. It's not about saving the climate, it's about changing human society. And here's another one of those cusp organizations answering to the same secret society as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Club of Rome. This was created in the 1960s specifically to use the environment as an excuse to advance this Hunger Games society agenda. This is one of its co-founders, Aurelio Pecci, in 1991. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. Exactly what has been going on. So you have the hidden hand, the spider ultimately, coming down through the secret society and Club of Rome networks, down through government policy, mainstream science, the green groups, and then the people get the consequences as usual on the bottom. Here's the Global Warming Survival Handbook, David de Rothschild, the usual suspects on the stage selling the web's policy and propaganda. See, the great thing to remember is it's not the picture that often tells the story, it's the caption. Because the caption or the voiceover on television is telling you what to make of the picture. The picture might not be what they're telling you it is, but people accept it when the voiceover tells them it is. Here's a distressed polar bear. Distressed polar bears have existed all along, but no, it's global warming. Well, this lady, Dr. Susan Crockford, University of Victoria, British Columbia, would not agree. She says, polar bears are still a conservation success story. With a global population almost certainly greater than 25,000, we can say for sure there are more polar bears now than 40 years ago. I don't remember Al Gore mentioning that. Propaganda, look at this nonsense. And this is the Maldives government having a cabinet meeting underwater to highlight the dangers of sea level rise around the Maldives. And this is Dr. Nicholas Morner, former president of the International Commission on Sea Level Change. In 40 years of study, I have found no sea level rise at all. In fact, when I was researching this latest book, there was a study came out this year of sea levels, and they found there is more land now than there was, and many of the areas where there's more land are in coastal areas. This is 4 studies from 2016, no observable sea level effect from man-made global warming. But just give out the propaganda, particularly to the young, to tell them their world is being destroyed by the old people. It's hot, it's global warming. It's cold, it's global warming. All these things that Gore predicted, death and destruction, by now, in fact, up 7 years ago, some of them, never happened. And this is a point, when you're telling the truth, you don't need to fix the data. But they've been caught fixing the data over and over and over again. This is the infamous hockey stick graph, where they said this was the temperature, it's kind of it's staying there, and it's not going up, and it's all, whoosh, okay, we're all going to die! But they just kind of forgot something here, called the medieval warm period. This is why emails that have come out from these people have been made public, reveal that they were conspiring, conspiracy, do they exist? Conspiring to lose that, so that could look like that. And medieval warm period was a time, 1000 AD and closer to now, which where temperatures were much higher than they are today. And then, I mean, what caused them? Turbocharged hand carts? I mean, what caused that? Well, how did human industrial activity cause the medieval warm period? I'll get to what caused it in a minute. So then it comes down into what's called the Little Ice Age, when temperatures absolutely plummeted. And then it started to rise and come up into the, through the 1900s. And in that Little Ice Age, the Thames in London used to freeze over every year. I'm sure the same happened in the Netherlands. And they had ice fairs on the Thames. And when they now say, it's the hottest year since records began, what they don't tell you is most of these records began when we're still coming out of the Little Ice Age, so the comparison is irrelevant. And the temperatures we're supposed to have soared have remained relatively stable. This is the mean temperature, the green line. They go up and down, of course they do. And this is a scientists, they were gagged on this until it was revealed they were gagged and then it had to be released. This was at CERN, the kind of home of global physics. And they, in one of their studies, they found there was a very close correlation between the impact of cosmic rays and Earth temperature, which kind of means it's a sensational finding. It's absolutely sensational. What it means is that the sun affects temperature. Gee, I'm sorry I didn't go to university because they worked it out. The sun affects temperature. Of course it does. Have you ever seen a climate change scientist talk about the sun's impact on temperature? Climate change myth smashed as scientists confirm solar activity is a significant driver of the Earth's climate. You don't bloody say. There you go, Al Gore, the truth at last. This is what changes temperature, or at least massively influential on it. Here, George Carlin, the planet is fine, the people are fucked. That's about right. About right. Now, this is a graph of greenhouse gases, and that, of course, is CO2. That's carbon dioxide. It has to be. With all the propaganda, it has to be. But it's not. This is CO2, and only the red sliver, because this is three-dimensional, the only red sliver is caused by human activity. The rest is natural. This is water vapor and clouds. I think we ought to ban them. Or at least tax them, tax clouds and condensation. Tax it. It's a nonsense, and that's why you can do a coach and horses through the official story. Why do so many scientists cling on to this nonsense? Climate Change Business Journal, annual cost, in other words, money frothing around to go to scientists who sing from the song sheet, $1.5 trillion a year. And this is a lady who, at the start of this world tour, I was featuring Dr. Judith Curry as someone who was questioning global warming. This story, by the time the tour ends, she's lost her job at a university for not singing from the song sheet, in effect. French TV weatherman sacked for book questioning hype over climate change. The climate change scam: mislead the public, get a big grant. Tell the truth, lose your job. That's why the song sheet is so widely circulated. And this guy, Upton Sinclair, said, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it." 97% 97% of climate scientists agree humans are causing global warming. Lie. Even the Wall Street Journal has exposed that myth. But just keep repeating it. This is an Empress professor, University of Manchester, with a long history in these various areas of science, including NASA, a man called Professor Leslie Woodcock, and he says this: "Water is a much more powerful greenhouse gas, and there is 20 times more of it in our atmosphere, around 1% of the atmosphere, whereas CO2 is only 0.04%. Carbon dioxide has been made out to be some kind of toxic gas, but the truth is that it's the gas of life. We breathe it out, plants breathe it in, and it's not caused by us. Global warming is nonsense." This is a man in Australia, David Evans, full-time or part-time consultant for 11 years with the Australian Greenhouse Office, now the Department of Climate Change, who believed it to start with, and now says this: "The debate about global warming has reached crazy proportions. The theory was based on a guess that was proved false by empirical evidence during the 1990s, but the gravy train was too big, with too many jobs, industries, trading profits, political careers, and that this is the key, and the possibility of world government and total control riding on the outcome. We have to have world government to dictate to every country to save the planet from climate change disaster. That's the scam. That's the narrative." Evans said that the governments and their tame climate scientists now outrageously maintain the fiction that carbon dioxide is a dangerous pollutant, rather than admit they were wrong even when the evidence is overwhelming. James Lovelock, godfather of the Green Movement in Britain, said, "We're all going to die." Now he said, "Actually, I've looked at it, and it's a religion, and it's bunk." Creator of the Weather Channel, John Coleman, global warming is a nonsense. And notice the language. Scientists who support the climate change lie are scientists and climate experts. Scientists who expose the lie are skeptics and deniers. Straight off the books of, or the pages of 1984. Greenhouse fracking, however, is no problem, even though it emits large quantities of greenhouse gases. That would seem to be a contradiction, but it's not. What brings them together is what suits the agenda good, what doesn't suit the agenda bad. And so belief in global warming is good for the agenda, and fracking, for reasons I go into in the books, is good for the agenda. And so you have an apparent contradiction, which isn't, because what's good for the agenda is what connects the two of them. And Nikola Tesla, a real scientist, who understood so much more about reality, as we'll see in part 2. He said, "The electricity to power human society is all around us. We live in a seething mass of electricity and electromagnetism, which I'll explain in part 2, which can be tapped for power without use of fossil fuels." He said this: "All peoples everywhere should have free electricity sources. Electric power is everywhere present in unlimited quantities and can drive the world's machinery without the need for coal, oil, and gas." Why aren't the people that saying that fossil fuels are killing the planet, why aren't they pushing this technology, which they've known about since they stole his documents when he died almost penniless in 1943? Because they want to keep this from us, because they don't want us to have free power. They want us to pay massive amounts of money for it, so that's part of the control system. Now, what they're saying, quickly, what they're saying, whenever there's a disaster, a weather disaster, they say, "It's global warming." Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not, because weather wars are with us. Is weather warfare a conspiracy theory? No, it's not. According to the World Meteorological Organization, at least 52 countries have weather manipulating, not studies, but programs actually doing it. America is, as I reveal in the books from their documents, is massively advanced in it. And Richard Day, 1969, and he worked in weather manipulation during World War II for the American military. He said this in 1969. "There was mention then of weather. This was another really striking statement. He said, we can or soon will be able to control the weather. He said, I'm not merely referring to dropping iodide crystals into the clouds to precipitate rain that's already there, but real control. And weather was seen as a weapon of war, a weapon of influencing public opinion. It could make rain or withhold rain in order to influence certain areas and bring them under your control. There were two sides to this that were rather striking. He said, on one hand, you can make drought during the growing season so that nothing will grow. And on the other hand, you can make for very heavy rains during harvest season so the fields are too muddy to bring in the harvest. And indeed, one might be able to do both. There was no statement about how this was be done. It was either stated it was already possible or very, very close to being possible in 1969. It's massively possible and advanced now. And things like Hurricane Harvey, they can be, I'm not saying it was, but they can be technologically created with the technology they have now. How do we get there? Agenda 21, 2030. Okay, you've got your problem. We must save the planet from climate change. And so here's your solution. The United Nations agendas, same as climate change, Agenda 21, 2030. These are agendas which have been signed up to by countries all over the world to transform global society. This is from their own documents, the wish list of Agenda 21, which was formed and agreed at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, fronted up by the Rockefeller family, the Rothschilds, and others working for them. This demands an end to national sovereignty. Everywhere you see that. State planning and management of all land resources, ecosystems, deserts, forests, mountains, oceans, and fresh water. Agriculture, rural development, biotechnology, and ensuring equity equals slavery. The state to define the role of business and financial resources. This is all to save the planet. Abolition of private property. It's not sustainable, apparently, except for the elite. Restructuring the family unit. Here we go. Children raised by the state. Here we go. People told what their job will be. Major restrictions on movement. Creation of human settlement zones. I'll come to those in a sec. Major resettlement of people as they are forced to vacate land where they live. Dumbing down education. Achieved. Mass global depopulation in pursuit of all the above. Now, Agenda 2030 was agreed at the 2015 meeting of the UN General Assembly, and this is basically Agenda 21 on steroids. What they do, this is how the scam works. They tell you what they want to do, and they give you things you couldn't argue with. No poverty, you can argue with that. Zero hunger, exactly. Quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation and all that. What they don't tell you is what it really means. And what it really means is the centralized control of everything to bring that about. Even the water we drink. Centralized control of everything. So let's take this one. Zero hunger. Right. This is Richard Day in 1969. Food supplies would become under tight control. Food shortages would be created in a hurry, and people would realize the dangers of overpopulation. Ultimately, whether the population slows down or not, food supply is to be brought under centralized control so that people would have enough to be well nourished, but they would not have enough to support any fugitive of the new system. In other words, if you had a friend or relative who didn't sign on to this new Hunger Games society, and growing one's own food would be outlawed, this would be done under some sort of pretext. In the beginning, I mentioned there were two purposes for everything. One, the ostensible purpose, and one, the real purpose. And the ostensible purpose here would be that growing your own vegetables was unsafe. It would spread disease or something like that. So the acceptable idea was to protect the consumer, but the real idea was to limit the food supply, and growing your own food would be illegal. And in places like North America, they're using zonal laws to stop people growing their own food, to, like here, pull up community gardens because they want control of all the food supply. You want to eat, you do as we say. That's the idea. War on family and organic farms in America, and as they fall, then the giant corporations take over. 1913, corn is 100% farmer-owned. 2013, 95% owned by corporations in America, 90% GMO. Monsanto and Bayer, this merger that's in the offing. Why food and agriculture just took a turn for the worse. More and more centralized control of food. Henry Kissinger, control oil and you control nations. Control food and you control the people. Control water and you control them even quicker. So we have clean water and sanitation. Control the water and you control the people, like I say, even quicker than food. And what they're doing now in places like America, like I say, that's the starting point of it, it goes global, is the states, or some states, like here in Oregon, they are claiming ownership of every drop of water, even if it falls on your own land or your own house. They own it. This is a couple forced to destroy a 40-year-old pond on their own property because the government said it owned the rainwater that fell in it. We've had this Nestle CEO saying water is not a human right, should be privatized. Not a human right. You try living without it, mate. US court, private property rights, all water to be controlled by government. This is what Agenda 21, 2030 is all about. California legislature wants to tax drinking water for the first time. Water barons, Wall Street, mega banks are buying up the world's water. This is the theme. So then we come to sustainable cities and communities. Well, who can argue with that? Well, I can, if you look at the background. What they're doing, again, in America, is they are not repairing rural roads. They are closing rural schools. They're pulling money out of rural economies, and they're closing roads, not just not repairing them, and they're forcing people off the land because they want everyone in the cities where they can be controlled. This is a map from the simulated reserve and corridor system to protect biodiversity required by the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and Wildlands Project, etc., etc. This is a map of America as they want it to be. The red areas, right, little to no human use. The yellow areas, which are the next biggest, buffer zones, highly regulated human use. Only the little pockets in green are normal use. They are the human settlement zones that they wish to eventually bring in. So America 2050, the Agenda 21 depopulation of rural areas has begun. And some years ago now, between 2005 and 2010, the point crossed where more people in the world lived in urban areas than in rural areas, and it's gone on rushing apart ever since. Nearly 50% living in rural areas in the 1930s. In America, 21% worked in farming. Now it's 20% is rural, 2% in farming. People are being got off the land. That's why you see abandoned farms all over America. And when they abandon them, the corporations move in and take over the land. This is a story of that happening in India. It's happening all over the world. And these are the kind of people who come in and buy the land once they've forced people off it. So then we go to sustainable cities, because that's where the people are supposed to go when they're forced off the land. And the human settlement zones are planned to be tightly populated with very small apartments, which are happening all the time, where people are forced together and they're under constant 24/7 surveillance because they can be in that situation. This is the mayor of, as then was, Michael Bloomberg in New York, announcing the creation of 165,000 units in New York, and the living space in these units is between the two yellow lines, 30 feet by 10 feet. And this is what they plan in the Hunger Games Society human settlement zones, and it's happening everywhere. One of the ticks, as I've gone around the world on my checklist, is this, and it's everywhere. Mini prisons and micro apartments built across America in the name of sustainability. This is the Agenda 21, 2030. Warning over micro homes that are barely larger than a jail cell. That's in Britain. Agenda 21, city officials, developers recommend coffin apartments for the middle class. This is in Australia. It's one of them in Australia. And of course, I understand why they have them in Australia, because they haven't got enough land, have they? This is New Zealand, just the width of a guy. And this is a UN New Urban Agenda meeting in 2016 in Quito, Ecuador, where they were discussing this very plan. And this is a very good depiction by an American artist called David Dees of what the human settlement zones are supposed to be like under total surveillance. And this is what Richard Day said in 1969. Privately owned housing would become a thing of the past. The cost of housing and financing housing would gradually be made so high that most people couldn't afford it. Young people would be more and more becoming renters, particularly in apartments and condominiums. People would not be able to buy homes, and gradually more and more of the population would be forced into small apartments which would not accommodate very many children. Again, another tick all over the world. Most people in their 20s and 30s will never buy a home. That was Australia. Young people in UK increasingly giving up on owning a home. Obama's America, 1/3 of millennials broke, single, living at home. Our homeless figures rising because of housing crisis that is in Sweden. And this is a story from this week highlighting the incredible cost of buying a home in cities in the United States. Exactly as he said, but he went on. This is the next stage. Ultimately, people would be assigned where they would live, and it would be common to have non-family members living with you. This by way of your not knowing just how far you could trust anybody. This would all be under the control of a central housing authority. Have this in mind. When they ask how many bedrooms in your house, how many bathrooms in your house, do you have a finished game room? This information is personal and of no national interest to government under our existing constitution, but you'll be asked those questions, as we are. Now, just to complete this, this section, a vital point. Actually, I started out on this in a way. If you are going to, A, bring this in without people realizing where the steps are planned to go until it's too late, you have to silence the information so it doesn't get to the people. That's what this silence David Icke and ban his meetings is really all about. It's nothing about what they say it is. It's about stopping this information coming to light. And secondly, if your battleground is the human perception or state, human perception, we get our perceptions from information received. It might be a personal experience, it might be the evening news, but it's information received. If you are wanting to control their perceptions, you have to control the information received. And this is why this massive war on freedom of speech in every area you look is happening, to control the information so that you control the perception. Silencing the population, how do we get there? This is massively important. Control perception, you control behavior. Freedom of speech is the new evil. This is where it's being demonized. Freedom of speech is being demonized. Wherever you look, and it's all been long planned, whether it's countries, Facebook, corporations, YouTube, Google, they're all terrified of the truth. Serving the hidden hand. All these major information corporations that control the internet and the communication of information on the internet, they're all controlled by the same web and all working to the same agenda. And Google now openly admitting that it is suppressing information that it doesn't consider to be what we would call mainstream. Bookmark this over 400 links Google doesn't want you to visit. They're suppressing and oppressing your ability to see alternative information, which you can't divorce from trying to close my meetings down with these ultra-Zionist hate groups that don't answer to Jewish people at all. They don't give a shit about Jewish people. They answer to this web. Just an excuse. Pay to play. Facebook rolls out nightmare scenario. They're introducing a situation at Facebook which is going to dramatically reduce the profile and the ability to communicate on Facebook of people who aren't of the system. Big Brother here. Twitter will monitor users' behavior. This is a story from this week. They're saying that to accept you as someone that can post information on Twitter, then they're actually going to look at your statements and what you say in other areas of the internet and your life as part of that analysis. If someone said that 5 years ago, they'd say, "Oh, you're joking, man." They'd never do that. It was always planned to do that. All these people, Monsters, Inc., all owned by the web. Silicon Valley is the devil's playground. And look at the control. When we get into transhumanism, we'll come back here big time. But look at the control that that small area of Northern California now has over the communication and circulation of information worldwide. All planned, terrified of the truth. This is where the fake news thing comes from. We'll call it fake news, and then we'll have the excuse to suppress it and stop it circulating. And so Facebook and Google, they're having fact checkers to check facts to see if it's credible or not. Facebook's fact checkers, funded by the same international terrorist behind radical cop-killing groups in the USA, George Soros. He's funding the fact checker groups that are deciding what is acceptable and not. Google and Soros-backed fact checkers join forces to control news research results. Where are you, mainstream media? Because you're next. The Pope condemns fake news. What about that walking on water deal? It was the Russians. Definition of fake news, telling you what the system does not want you to hear. Real fake news, been going on for decades. And here we have Bezos and Amazon. He does a $600 million deal contract with the CIA. He's done another one since. And he owns the Washington Post, which reports on the CIA. What could possibly go wrong? Now, stop. Political correctness. Again, another tick all over the world. Silence each other so we don't have to. That is political correctness. Political correctness does not legislate tolerance. It only organizes hatred, which is what it is. Why is it that people who say we're anti-hate always scream with hatred on their face? It's a kind of strange thing, but it's what happens. Antifa, we're anti-hate. We're anti-violence. No, we're not anti-violence. We are violent. That's right. Oh, sorry, I got that wrong. Yeah. Okay. And who funds you? George Soros. Antifa, this black bloc method as well. It's anti-fascist fascism. They're doing what the Nazis did. What did the Nazis do? What does any tyranny do? When it starts to get power, it burns the books. It bans the meetings. It stops the circulation of any information that's challenging it and exposing it. And we've got to such a crazy situation now of inversion, where people who call themselves progressive, which is supposed to be liberal, it isn't, they are using the same methods as the Nazis to silence people they don't agree with. And they're so far up their own arse without a torch, they cannot see it. Antifa, the elite's proxy army to destroy your freedom. No hate, face of hate, stooges of the elite, slaves fighting slaves for the slave owners. And this political correctness, this was simply George Orwell's Newspeak in 1984. Newspeak, a controlled language as a tool to limit freedom of thought and concepts that pose a threat to the regime, such as freedom, self-expression, individuality, and peace. He talked about old speak, which were words that had the ability to articulate detail, to express your thoughts and your opinions in detail, which our language has had. And he talked about Newspeak being replaced by Big Brother, old speak being replaced by Brother with Newspeak, which were words that said nothing, that could not express detail. So you couldn't express your opinion in detail. The words didn't exist. And as we think in words as well, you couldn't even think in detail. And that is what is happening with the old language, old speak, being replaced by the language of political correctness, which is nothing more than Newspeak. And he wasn't coming from his imagination. That's why he's been so accurate. This is political correctness. That's what it's really about. Silencing the population. And you can't divorce political correctness from again trying to ban my meetings. It's all the same web with all the same agenda. In the 1960s, I remember students going on marches for freedom of speech. Now they go on marches against it. It's unbelievable. And what is happening is they are, if you look at what's happening in America, they are connecting in the public mind, because connecting concepts to create a perception of those concepts is very, very powerful. They are connecting in the public mind the far right, white supremacists with freedom of speech. They're connecting the two phrases. So you talk about freedom of speech. Oh, you're one of them white supremacists then. This is how it works. And it is working with many people. Progressives, the new tyranny, the new censors, the new big brother. And like I say, progressives, it's a tyranny. And it's not liberal. This is a definition of progressive. Favoring or advocating progress, change, improvement, or reform, as opposed to wishing to maintain things as they are, especially in political matters. Adolf Hitler could have said that was a definition of what he was doing. A liberal, which I would say defines my personal view of the world, not politically liberal, the definition of liberal, is very different. Favorable to or in accord with concepts of maximum individual freedom possible, especially as guaranteed by law and secured by governmental protection of civil liberties, favoring or permitting freedom of action, especially with respect to matters of personal belief or expression. And the progressives are seeking to destroy everything that comes under that definition, the inverted world we live in. And we're having created, people call them snowflakes, I call it Generation Jelly. And I've got great respect for young people who've come through this massive mind program. This is the most perceptually attacked and assaulted generation, certainly in modern history, en masse. And to come through that, and to come through this shite, and still be able to think for yourself and see through it, it's a very, very, it just shows the power of consciousness over program. But so many are falling for this program, where you can't do anything. You have to have a safe space. No one can have an opinion around you that's different to yours. And when you get people into that mode, where they're frightened of their own shadow and terrified of another opinion, they give their power away to those they think will protect them, which is what this mind game is all about. They talk about safe spaces. No one can say anything I don't agree with in this safe space. Deplatforming people, absolutely off the pages of Orwell, where they ban speakers in universities who say things that are different to the accepted norm. And it's incredible. The juvenile, childlike nature of so many university campuses and colleges around the world. And this is the generation that will be in the institutions very soon. And that's why they're developing them. Look at this one. Mini police state, students' union employs safe space marshals to control debates. You're having a debate. No, you can't say that. This is where we are now, and it's happening so fast. These are some Generation Jelly who said they were literally traumatized by seeing Trump 2016 written in chalk on the pavement. In universities, they're having these things called trigger warnings, where they're warning you that something's going to be said that might upset you. They're having trigger warnings at this Scottish university in the theological course that the crucifixion's coming up. And it might upset you. Well, I would have thought you'd have heard of it before if you were having a theological course. I would have thought so. Morning, Vicar. That was a nice sermon. But you stopped just before the crucifixion. Oh, crucifixion? Oh, no, there was a trigger warning. Don't know anything about it. Well, this is a good one. When I was in Australia, I saw this. Political correctness goes beyond insane at the public school that just banned applause. A public school in Sydney has banned applause and cheering in order to avoid offending people who are sensitive to noise. Instead of clapping and cheering, it will now be acceptable. Instead of clapping and cheering, it would now be acceptable to engage in air punching. and to pull excited faces. And students will even be allowed, and parents will be allowed to wriggle on the spot. No, I'm not making this up, the writer said. You don't have to today. You don't have to. And while real oppression is going on, where are they? We've got a meeting. This is the new fascism run by anti-fascists. Political correctness is fascism pretending to be manners. That's exactly what it is. And it's not about diversity. It's about destroying diversity, inversion. And, of course, political correctness means you fall into label. You fall into label consciousness, which is identity politics, which no longer says, I want what's fair and just for everybody. You say, I only want what suits me. That's identity politics. Israel have been experts at it. The Zionist movement is the world's greatest political correctness institution in all its forms because it's so well organized. And this is the antidote. This is the deprogramming device. A bit of backbone, because if we go on being intimidated into not saying this, don't say that, oh no, better not say that, oh, keep quiet about that, we're going to hit a wall eventually, and that wall is going to have a big sign on it, end of freedom. So how deep is the program? To finish here, this is what Richard Day said in 1969. Nothing is permanent. Streets will be rerouted, renamed. Areas you had not seen in a while will become unfamiliar. Among other things, this would contribute to older people feeling that it was time to move on. They feel they couldn't even keep up with the changes in the areas they were once familiar. And he talked about the bringing in of the demise pill, that where you get to a certain age, you have a nice party with your children, then you take the demise pill at a certain age. That's what he's talking about. And the stepping stone to that, the ability to take people's lives before they would naturally end. I can quite understand why people would want to leave this world if they're in pain and all these other things. But we've got to get to connect the dots. And this is a slippery slope to the demise pill. That's what it's all about. That's why they are desperate to get rid of old people once they can no longer serve the system. Buildings would be allowed to stand empty and deteriorate, and streets would be allowed to deteriorate in certain localities. The purpose of this was to provide the jungle, the depressed atmosphere for the unfit. The bringing in of the new system probably would occur on a weekend in the winter. Everything would shut down on Friday evening, and Monday morning, when everyone awakened, there would be an announcement that the new system was in place. During the process in getting the United States ready for these changes, everybody would be busier with less leisure time and less opportunity to really look about and see what was going on around them. And as this guy said, if you wish to get out of prison, the first thing you must realize or do is realize you are in prison. That's the key. If you think you're free, you can't escape because you think there's nothing to escape from. There is. If you don't change direction, you may end up where you are heading. And at the moment, we are heading into a fascist, centralized global tyranny of almost unimaginable proportions based on connecting the human mind to technology. But we don't have to go there. There's 7.5 billion being manipulated. The ones doing the manipulation in full knowledge are absolutely tiny by comparison. So that's one step in the rabbit hole. When we've had lunch for an hour, and I'll be back sharp on an hour, I've got so much to get through today, then we're going to go into the next step of the rabbit hole. Reality is an illusion, and from that, everything opens up. Thank you. I'll enjoy that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.